annual meeting, Strengthening the Rule of Law and Human Rights for Sustaining Peace and Fostering Development. This session is titled The Future of Business and Human Rights, Session 4. We'll begin in just a few minutes. We would also like to let you know that the meeting will be recorded today. The session will be live streamed on YouTube, and the live stream can be found at Strengthening the Rule of Law and Human Rights for Sustaining Peace and Fostering Development. This session is titled The Future of Business and Human Rights. And before we begin, we'd like to let you know what features are available today for you on Zoom. The chat will be disabled. However, there will be messages sent out as public announcements that you will be able to see. And the Q&A will be enabled, so feel free to send your questions and comments there, and you will also be able to upvote questions that you feel are important to answer. But please understand that we have a limited time in the session to address all questions and requests for intervention, and that we'll be doing our best to ensure that we address your requests and inputs. If you'd like to join the conversation on social media, please use hashtag ROL4Peace. Also, to bring your attention to the welcome screen today, this features a photo taken in Painesville, Liberia, which features members of the traditional music band, the Crusaders of Peace, who are performing to welcome the attendees of the Liberian Women's Consultative Forum. The photo was taken by Albert Gonzalez Farran. So if you're just joining us, welcome to the 2020 UNDP annual meeting, Strengthening the Rule of Law and Human Rights for Sustaining Peace and Fostering Development. This is session number 4, The Future of Business and Human Rights. Please pay attention to the chat, as our team will be posting regular announcements regarding the functions of Zoom that are available to you during today's session. So it's now time to start the session. I will hand off to your moderator today, Ms. Katie Thompson, head of the Rule of Law, Security, and Human Rights team at the Crisis Bureau of UNDP. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dory. Thank you for the introduction. It's really great to have everybody here today. This is the second day of UNDP's annual meeting on rule of law and human rights, which this year focuses on securing the social contract in these difficult times. And this morning's session is on business and human rights, and we're going to do a global launch of our new initiative, where we're going to take this fabulous work that's happening in Asia and try to ensure that we can do a similar level of impact across the globe. So I'm really happy to have an illustrious panel with me today. We have Professor Anita Ramasastry, we have Dr. Albashir Makassa with us, and we have also Shubha Shekhar, I can see you now, I lost you there for a second, as well as Livio Sarandrea from UNDP, and of course, the Assistant Secretary General of UNDP's Crisis Bureau, Asako Okai, who will all be speaking. We really look forward to hearing from you. We want to draw your attention to the Q&A, so please post your questions there. There's also an upvoting function, so if you'd like to encourage one particular question to go to the top of the list, please actively engage there. We really want to hear from you. We're very open to hearing questions, observations, critiques. We want to hear a broad conversation on this issue. I also want to point out that we have an online consultation happening under UNDP's a UNDP platform called Spark Blue. We'll be posting that link in the chat so you can see that, and any deeper conversation that you'd like to continue both within this session and beyond this session, please go to Spark Blue, register, and take part in the conversation there. It's a conversation that will last till the 24th of July, and we're going to use it to design our future priorities in the area of rule of law, security, and human rights, and in particular, obviously, on business and human rights following this session. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that we have a concept note which is uploaded in our website. So please, if you would like to have more details, go back to the website where you registered. You're going to find that concept note there. We will also post it on Spark Blue. Now, I think that I've managed to do all of the announcements that are needed and that we can start to move on towards the substance. I just want to let the colleagues know we have about 150 participants. I see the number still going up. So I think it goes without saying, because you see from this session and probably from the work that you've heard about before you arrived here, how committed UNDP is to working on business and human rights in the context of a broader engagement that we have on human rights and the strengthening, in particular, the strengthening of national human rights systems. We have been doing this work in Asia since 2016. And it's essentially focused around holding up and showing the importance of the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. And we work in this respect in very close partnership with the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. And Professor Anita is a representative chair of that group. She'll be talking to us later. This is particularly important for us. And we'll be also next week launching a partnership with the working group, and we really hope that you'll be joining us then. That will also take place online. We can actually post details of that event here too. We have a strong commitment within UNDP to work as a convener and to bring together actors who are working on complex and integrated problems, especially those which are essential to us achieving the 2030 agenda. In this particular domain, we work very closely with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as the UN Working Group. We also work with the ILO, the International Labour Organization, OECD, UNICEF, UNEP, IOM, UN Women, a whole array of actors who have a strong engagement in this area, not to mention the strong engagement of civil society and national human rights institutions at national level. All critical actors in making and ensuring support for responsible business practices to support the 2030 agenda and human rights. So we're really happy to have the support of Anita in launching this initiative, and we're really looking forward to hear from you. And we want to just express formally our commitment to supporting you on this roadmap that we have together as we move forward into the decade of action for achieving the 2030 agenda. So we're going to start with a keynote speech from Professor Anita Ramasastry, and then we will be going on to hear from our two other speakers before we move to the launch. We will see a short video that explains a little bit about our work, and we'll have an opportunity to put some questions to the panelists. So with that, and without taking up further time, I'm going to pass the floor to Anita, who's actually in Seattle, and we just want to thank her for getting up so early and which shows and demonstrates her commitment to support us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. Assistant Secretary General Okai, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants, indeed, greetings from Seattle. My thanks to UNDP for this invitation and for their partnership in connecting the sustainable development and business and human rights agendas on the ground. And as I'll say today, I feel that the business and human rights movement and agenda is key to resilient recovery, sustainable development, and the rule of law. It's my great privilege to address you today at this important annual UNDP meeting focusing on the rule of law and human rights as part of the future we all want. I'm a professor who runs a graduate program in the law of sustainable international development. So I'm a firm believer in Agenda 2030. Call me an SDG evangelist. I'm equally passionate about business and human rights, and as a chair of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, I hope to convert you, each of you, to this cause. We are at a turning point, an inflection for the future we want. Is it a future of closed borders, armed conflict, rising inequality, climate crisis, pandemics, and discrimination? Or is it a path of resilience, recovery, inclusion, peace, and prosperity? I think we all want that second future. As we reflect today, there are two key commitments made by states that are relevant to this discourse, and both should be equally important to the future we want. The first, which you are all familiar with, of course, is the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a pillar of UNDP's work. Through its 17 goals, it sets forth the aspirations we have for people and the planet. At times, however, this can seem at odds with the way in which governments have been approaching issues in terms of ensuring that those who are the most vulnerable are lifted up and not held down as we move forward in the 21st century. Now, SDG 17 also invites business to the table as a partner in the quest for a better planet. The SDGs recognize the power of partnership and also that in many cases, national governments cannot solve problems alone. They need the support of civil society and the private sector to identify needs and develop solutions. The second framework that's relevant to our future is the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, brought to life by the UN Human Rights Council, but now the universally accepted framework on how to promote corporate respect for human rights around the globe. In a minute, I will explain the key concepts set forth in the UN Guiding Principles, but I first wanted to emphasize a key point about why the development community needs to consider human rights in business as an integral part of its expectations for business. For many of us working in the field of economic development, we start with the baseline that business activity and economic development are good for an economy. Business and investment help economies grow and help individuals lift themselves out of poverty. But even businesses that may seem forces for good can also be causes of harm. The SDGs seeks to harness businesses as a force for good, and the UN Guiding Principles provide us with another guidepost and essential ingredients, focusing on ensuring that businesses also identify the harms they cause or are connected to, and that they take steps to prevent and to mitigate or remedy those harms. So we really see these two frameworks as working together. For example, a company that sells and manufactures disposable masks, which we all need now, may be contributing to public good by ensuring a stable supply of these masks in a given country. At the same time, the company might also be contributing to harm if it is sourcing from factories where workers are subject to forced labor. The UN Guiding Principles ask us to take a hard look at the negative impacts of business conduct and ask businesses to respect human rights and to actively or proactively prevent harm. Thus, the UN Guiding Principles are about a shift in all of our mindsets. We are asking businesses to think not only about risks to the company and its assets when it makes decisions, but to think about risks and harms to people from its business operations. As we look at 10 years of the United Nations Guiding Principles and 5 years of the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to ask about their continued relevance in the decade to come. We will reach 2030 very soon, and we need all the tools in our toolkit. And I want to ensure that development experts embrace the Guiding Principles as a key tool alongside the SDGs. I will now turn and ask Hermes to put up the slides.
They are up.
Great, thank you. The UN Guiding Principles are a framework known as the Protect, Respect, and Remedy framework, consisting of 3 pillars. And the first slide just shows kind of why it's an important framework, but I'll ask you to advance to the next slide, which explains this framework, which is 3 pillars. Pillar 1, the state duty to protect, focuses on the duty of states to fulfill their key role in protecting individuals from human rights abuses by using legislation, incentives, and policy tools to ensure that companies respect human rights in their business operations. This can include, as appropriate, regulation of companies when they operate overseas as well as nationally, for example, via supply chains or an investment activity in another country via subsidiary, building a dam or operating a mine, for example. The second pillar is the business responsibility to respect human rights, and it focuses in or hones in on the role of business. It asks businesses to benchmark their obligations globally to people, not by local laws alone, which can often leave individuals, especially in weak rule of law zones, without human rights protections. Instead, they need to measure their conduct and their expectations against international human rights treaties, including core labor standards. The mantra of the Guiding Principles is do no harm. The UN Guiding Principles ask companies to use something called human rights due diligence. This is just a process to identify the impacts of their business operations on people, and then to prevent, mitigate, and remedy them. It asks them to know and show their negative human rights impacts and to fix them. The UN Guiding Principles are a foundational tool. The framework aims at prevention of harm and ensures that when we try to achieve the SDGs, that business comes to the table as a responsible partner. It's not enough for a business to do good. If a business builds a school in a community, but is also a large-scale polluter, its negative impact may far outweigh its contributions to economic development. As the UN Working Group has previously stated in its 10 key messages on the UN Guiding Principles and the SDGs, it is often by identifying and mitigating harm that business can make valuable contributions towards realizing the SDGs. So the Guiding Principles actually help the SDG agenda. For example, if a business identifies racial discrimination in the workplace and rectifies this, it contributes towards the achievement of SDG 10 of reducing inequality. Similarly, helping to end bonded labor in a supply chain contributes to SDG Goal 8, focusing on decent work. Thus, there is a tangible SDG benefit to the UN Guiding Principles. By doing no harm, companies are also doing tremendous good. So the UN Working Group sees the UN Guiding Principles as an integral part of Agenda 2030. Governments should only invite responsible business to the table, those that identify the harms of their business operations and address them. Now, are the UN Guiding Principles still relevant for the next decade? My answer is a resounding yes. The UN Guiding Principles helped us achieve much in the past decade. In some countries, governments are now requiring greater oversight and regulation of responsible business activity and are asking or requiring businesses to engage in human rights due diligence, identifying human rights abuses in global supply chains, trying to end forced labor, and ensuring that workers are protected in factories, be they in the global south or north. This is not to say that we don't have a long way to go, but we have seen much action. In other countries, we see national action plans on business and human rights, and these are developed through multi-stakeholder processes. These national action plans are like social contracts, where labor unions, business, civil society, and government come together to develop a plan and agenda for forward-looking responsible business conduct. UNDP has been an active partner in developing such plans in Asia, for example, and the UN Working Group has been active with the OECD and the ILO in Latin America. Some countries have created new mechanisms to provide access to remedy for victims of corporate human rights abuses. An example of this is the new Canadian Ombudsman for Responsible Enterprise, which will address human rights abuses connected to Canadian businesses in the extractive and apparel sectors that occur overseas. There's now a treaty process underway at the UN Human Rights Council for a new legally binding instrument focused on business and human rights and access to remedy, led by the government of Ecuador. These different pathways, national action plans, treaty processes, new remedy mechanisms are all outgrowths of the UN Guiding Principles. It is a tree that has many branches, and that's exactly what's meant to happen. We need many solutions, and we need additional solutions to really provide access to remedy for victims of corporate human rights abuses. Now, my second point here about why the guiding principles remain relevant is that the UN guiding principles are a tool for prevention of crises and for the emergence of sustainable and resilient business models. Using the concept of human rights due diligence, business can future-proof their decision-making. They can identify and anticipate the harms to people in order to engage in sound business planning. An example during the pandemic is that governments may not always be ready to move quickly in a crisis to regulate or change standards. If companies wait to implement, for example, key health and safety measures until there is regulation, workers in factories or meat or food processing plants will fall ill because they can't socially distance and need protections, and they may die because business did not proactively identify the impacts on their workers, but instead waited for government to act. Business has the tool in the UN guiding principles to itself identify harms and to decide how to remedy them without waiting for government to tell them how, by asking rights holders, by asking those that within its remit what needs to be done. In some situations, however, companies that have embraced the UN guiding principles and adopted human rights due diligence already know what steps to take during the pandemic. For one pharmaceutical company, this included not canceling its supplier contracts immediately due to the COVID-19 recession, thereby avoiding the mass devastation which can occur in developing economies so dependent on particular industries for their lifelines. That same company also took a measured approach to staff layoffs and took a pause to consider options for furloughs and balanced layoffs and salary reductions to avoid impacting the most vulnerable workers who have no savings or safety nets. They future-proofed their decision-making. This is not to say that businesses won't have tough choices in the recovery process. Rather, the idea is that those that had thought about the issue of impacts to people are better equipped to make more informed and resilient decisions. My third point is that the UN guiding principles are a utility or general purpose tool that is well suited for new problems and scenarios. As with any tool, it must be sharpened and adapted to new situations. Now we are asking about how climate-related measures do or don't impact human rights. We are all examining how issues of racial discrimination in employment have led to persistent inequality, and the Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted this. Images of Black persons on major consumer products, from skin lightening cream to American rice products, have led us to examine persistent stereotyping in business activity. We are addressing new deployments of technology, such as facial recognition and artificial intelligence, and how these can be deployed in a rights-respecting manner. The guiding principles allow governments and businesses to consider human rights impacts before technologies are developed and brought to market, when those contracts are signed with governments, and when technologies are deployed. At each step, we can use human rights to make better decisions and to prevent harms. And finally, the fourth reason why the guiding principles are so relevant now is that members of the business community and other leaders have called for a new form of business. We need, as the World Economic Forum has asked us all, to contribute to a great reset. The Business Roundtable, a major business association of large multinationals in the US, has committed to a new purpose for the corporation, which is about creating long-term value, and has affirmed the essential role of corporations that they can play in improving our society when CEOs are truly committed to meeting the needs of all stakeholders, including investors, employees, communities, suppliers, and customers. The Great Reset also involves a shift in the way in which states engage. The Secretary General in his call to action has noted that looking ahead, we need to build back better. Everything we do during and after this crisis must be with a strong focus on building more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies and societies that are more resilient in the face of pandemics, climate change, and many other global challenges. Please join me in adding the UN Guiding Principles to your resilience toolkit. As I conclude, and if we can move to the next slide, I'm pleased to also announce that the UN Working Group, with partnership from Germany, UNDP, and others, will be launching a project focusing on the next 10 years of the UN Guiding Principles on business and human rights. This will involve a high-level launch on July 7th, and we look forward to working with UNDP as we engage with stakeholders globally to draw a roadmap of how the UN Guiding Principles will be critical to addressing emerging challenges around the globe. I also take this occasion to congratulate UNDP on its own launch today of its Global BHR initiative, an important and ambitious one, and I very much look forward to our partnership in the year ahead. And the next slide will just show you, again, information about the project and how you can connect with the UN Working Group. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anita. I think you can take your links and share them in the chat and in the Q&A, and then everyone online. We've reached the high number of 207 people during your presentation. So everybody online will be able to access that information, which will be very crucial. Thanks so much for highlighting these complex connections with the current crisis that the private sector, as well as governments, as well as civil society and ordinary communities and families are facing in the context of COVID-19 and all of the repercussions that come from this, which will affect us in terms of political resilience, economic resilience, obviously also environmental resilience, and the challenge of sustainability that this all throws up. And thank you for highlighting how these guiding principles are relevant and continue to be relevant even in this context. There's a couple of questions coming up in the chat with regards to how in the context of services being shut down, we can manage to ensure enforceability, we can manage to continue to ensure people are represented and have remedies in this context. So we'll come back to that in the discussion. It's a particularly important connection with conversations we were having yesterday and later on how to access justice when injustice or rights are being infringed. So the other thing I would really like to thank you for, and I hope we can come back to that later, is a focus on, in a way, reconceptualizing what the meaning of profit is when one thinks in the long term about gains one can make in private sector, rather than thinking in terms of an annual assessment that looks only at a budget envelope, but looks more at other forms of impacts. It's extremely interesting. I hope we can get into it. Now, what I'd like to do before I speak for too long is move to the discussants. We are first of all going to hear from Ms. Shubha Shekhar. I want to just double check that she's there. I can see her, yes. Shubha is a close partner of UNDP in India. And in India, the UNDP office is working quite closely with Coca-Cola. You're looking at how to address child labor and how to look at issues such as land grabbing and the sugarcane supply chain. So we're really interested to hear from you. And after that, we will be going to Mozambique to hear from Dr. Makasa to hear about the engagement of national human rights institutions. So Shubha, without further ado, over to you. You have about 7 minutes and you'll receive a prompt from us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, and greetings from New Delhi to India to everybody. I would like to thank UNDP for inviting me for this very important session on the future of business and human rights in the next decade. I will share perspectives, and learnings and experiences from the ground, having had the opportunity to work in the field of business and human rights since 2007, handling some of the more complex markets in Eurasia and North Africa. So the important question is, what will the next decade look like from a business and human rights perspective? As already pointed out by Anita Ramashastri, our keynote speaker, that business and human rights will be mission critical for the resilience of business for future challenges, as well as to ensure the supply chains are sustainable. While there have been important developments in the history of human rights, the business and human rights movement was catalyzed after the UN Guiding Principles was adopted in 2011. These 9 years, as has been pointed out, from a business point of view also, we've been seeing rapid changes. There's been legislations, guidelines, representing the hard and the soft law approaches, increase in stakeholder expectations, more countries adapting the national action plans, increasing in the requirements of transparency on human rights and supply chains. Coca-Cola was an early adapter of the human rights approach. In fact, we set up a human rights department in 2005, and our policies, processes, whether it's due diligence, whether it's our auditing, are very closely aligned to the UN Guiding Principles. Our experience of the last several years implementing our human rights policy in the 200 plus countries that we operate has taught us that implementing respect for human rights is not something which happens overnight. It requires a lot of hard work, sustained, step-by-step, concerted focus over many years, and the journey has to be continued. And for the next decade, we need to ensure that whatever we have gained in this last decade is not lost by losing sight of it. So it needs to continue to be in the very center of all that is done by business. The second point I'd like to highlight, and again, this was one of the key themes of the keynote address, is the essentiality of integration of UN Guiding Principles with the SDG approaches for sustainable, scalable, and viable solutions. These approaches are very interconnected. So if you look at the vicious cycle of poverty, vulnerability, exploitation, these are the drivers of several of the human rights issues, whether it's child labor, forced labor, land rights, you name it, most of them have these as the drivers. If these need to be addressed in a sustainable way, to create virtuous cycles or vicious cycles, a holistic approach would be required to address these systemic and complex issues. I'd like to give an example which Katie Thompson referred to, from one of our from our supply chain, is that we prioritized work in our sugar supply chain as we saw that there was potential impact on people. So from 2014, we used third party to do due diligence in our 21 of our top sugar sourcing countries. Last year, we completed the India country sugar studies, and we started the remediation work there, in partnership with UNDP's Business and Human Rights vertical under Livio's leadership. Now, this particular partnership also draws on the UNDP's India SDG expertise. And the whole purpose of the exercise that is currently going on is to do a stakeholder mapping to understand who are the key stakeholders we need to invite, so that form a multi-stakeholder partnership to address these issues, which would have other sugar buying brands, which would have, civil society, government, so that because these issues are something which is beyond individual supply chains. Now, the third point, which is also alluded to, which is very important, is the due diligence approach. Now, this is a key part of the entire UNGP, framework, and this is a continual process. There are a number of tools which are needed, and this, so it's like a basket of tools, and no one tool can really meet, the entire due diligence requirements. And these tools and approaches will keep changing, to evolve to new situations. So, for example, if there's an acquisition, there are certain additional risks that come in. If there are, there could be new learnings. For example, in 2013, we got to know about land rights, and so we kind of try to understand that and incorporate the understanding. We kind of use the learnings from one of the top land rights NGO, which is Landesa. So this is evolving, shifting, and what was knowledge a couple of years back, there would be new knowledge that would come up in terms of the risks that are there. I also see an increased use in technology and due diligence processes with the COVID restrictions that are there, and I think this will continue to evolve. Now, the fourth point is that organizations and businesses need to think big and act big, given the magnitude of the challenges that we have faced, and these have been further widened by the COVID. Now, the only possibility of this is for organizations to break out of the siloed approach and look at partnerships and collaborations. Now, with the economic impact of COVID and the scarce resources during recovery, partnership approach is even more important. It's important to pull in resources, leverage collective strength to address these issues. Now, partnership is a buzzword. I mean, everybody talks about partnership, but these don't happen automatically. The organizations need to, again, put in hard work to build partnership capability within the organization. And, so that there is an ability to form strategy. What is the kind of partnership strategy? Where do we want to partner? What are the key areas? Who is the right partner? What are the kind of to build on, because not anyone can get into partnership. You need the partnership mindset that is collaborative, trusting, constructive relations need to form for those partnerships to really kind of give the results that are required. Creation of KPIs, project management capability. So there's a whole range when we talk about partnerships. Now, just to give you an idea, we have the Coca-Cola Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the Coca-Cola company. Since 1984, where it was started, we kind of donated more than $1 billion through various partnerships, which is more than 2,400 organizations globally. And in our experience of having these partnerships in global, local, in or regionally, we've kind of realized that there is a golden triangle of private sector, the government, and the civil society, which is especially effective to address local systemic complex problems in a very with local solutions in a very effective manner. And the last but not the least that I would like to mention is that the keynote speaker Anita Ramasastry mentioned about business needing a mindset change to think of people when making business decisions. I think this is extremely important, but decision making in business can be very complex, spanning global, regional, local, across functions, in M&A decisions and land acquisition decisions and manufacturing, within tiers of supply chain, and large parts of the supply chain at times are invisible to the business. This is endless. I mean, actually, the decision making that happens is endless, and it needs to kind of connect to the last mile. And therefore, the success of the next decade will depend hugely on capability building and sensitization of business, of managers who are at the forefront, and also the supply chain constituents. And essentially what one is saying is that human rights consciousness, understanding the people's lens, needs to be embedded within business and business decision making, and it should not be bolt on, something which is just added on. So while MNCs like Coca-Cola and large corporate houses have the internal capability to train the employees, to do a lot of capability building of the supply chain constituents. In fact, a large part of our work as regional human rights directors is to do that capability, of our people on the ground, of our suppliers, of our bottlers. But this kind of capability might not be there with a large number of businesses. And this is where, nation states, UN bodies, academic institutions can play a very valuable role. I will end by saying that, the states, the UN bodies, constructive civil societies, responsible business have a very important role to play in the next decade by working together to kind of give full life and meaning to the lofty principles which have been, enshrined in the UN guiding principles and the SDGs. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I must apologize that I didn't properly announce your title, which is as Director of the Human Rights for the Indian subcontinent, Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, and the Caucasus of Coca-Cola. So I mean, we're so impressed by this presentation and your commitment here. And thanks so much for emphasizing the challenges for a complex organization to integrate such an approach, in particular around due diligence and risk management within a complex supply chain with so many different actors. And I think that this is something that is, it's really important to flag. We can't, just having the standards is one thing, but the complex implementation of them for an organization such as yours, it really requires some thought and depth into how to bring about institutional change as well as commitment. So thank you for flagging that. I was also reminded of the complexity of mainstreaming any new principle into any organization as you were talking, and I think that sort of cultural change is something we should think about more. I'm now going to turn to Dr. Al-Bashir Makassa, who is the National Director for Human Rights and Citizenship in the Ministry of Justice, Constitutional and Religious Affairs in the Republic of Mozambique. We are so happy to have you with us today, and thank you, because I know that you have a special importance to us in terms of our work on business and human rights, not least because you were the personal motivator behind Livio in terms of getting him to work on this topic. So we're all grateful to you for making UNDP focus our efforts on this area. So without further ado, I believe you've been working with us since 2014 on this, so we're very, very much looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really, many thanks to Livio and you all to give me that opportunity to participate in this meeting. It's very important for us also to share not only what we are going to think, what you're thinking about from now on, which is the future, but also what we did until now and where we stuck. And maybe from that on, we can learn also something about. Really, I'm really happy to know that Livio is where he is today. You know, when Livio came here, we were starting on this issue, business and human rights. We are talking on 2013, 2014, something like that. And actually, we were the pioneers in Africa. I mean, starting with looking on an issue so difficult as looking on business and relating to human rights. An issue that many people don't want really sometimes to look at, especially the businesses. I mean, they think, many of them think on profits, but we thought that this should be an opportunity to take some that project on. And Professor Anita says something very important. You see, states sometimes don't really understand that sometimes they are already implementing the guiding principles without even knowing. And this is what one of the first thinking that we actually realized when we had the first workshop. And the time, I don't remember the member of the working group that was here with us, the very kind lady, I don't remember now the name, when she brought that idea on what actually the guiding principles were. So the people started to understand that actually the state were doing already things that already answered the guiding principles. You see, when they contracted with the companies, so some of the conditions that they were actually imposing to the companies were actually already implementation of the guiding principle without knowing. But so the question comes then there on, why then not really apply them and even enforce them when you are already doing it? You know, so you need really to understand exactly what these principles are. And so what we did at the time, and we did so as when we realized that really they were important, we started with our project. And that initiative was so important that we started with a baseline study. which gave us actually the idea that really what I said before, that really these principles, they were already being implemented. Unfortunately, not always for the best. Sometimes the companies were not agreeing to realize them, but we needed to continue. So we needed to see which activities actually were going on that could help to better understand that we could really get in and implement all these principles. So we realized that actually some activities were being done, but in the industry, I mean the extractive industry. But the point is that because we had that boom in the extractive industry, so the more attention were done in that area. But we had to see now at that time, we realized that we had to call attention that these were not only the only area to look at. Because if we had to look only in the industry, I mean, in the extractive industry, that we could leave other attention from the other areas that are also important and maybe support of the extractive industry. So we started also to work on that as to see in a holistic manner how this could happen. So in that, my experience that we went so far is that within that initiative that we had, we realized that we could go from the government inside, going to outside and bring all the stakeholders on board, and we did that. So looking from that point now on, since we have already that study, since we have already that baseline study, how can we from there on move forward? So this is the idea at this moment. And the idea is just to, from that point, restarting again on where we stopped, in which establishing a forum, a national forum, whereby all stakeholders are in. Are we talking about the business, and I mean the businesses, the state institutions, as well as state businesses? We are private sector, the representatives of the communities themselves also would be part of this forum, and from that forum we'll have our action plan. So this is our future thinking from now on. Looking on that, we do have also some challenges. The challenges come not only on the implementation of the guiding principles themselves, but also looking on what is happening in our country. We do have also, of course, these COVID-19 challenges, but we do have, again, the challenge of the terrorist attacks, especially in the areas where all these extractive industry and also in oil and other activities are happening. So this is a very big challenge. How can you manage to have all these activities going on, guaranteeing that the rights of the people are respected, but at the same time fighting all these, against all these challenges? So this is really the biggest deal that we have at this moment. And I really do hope that at least our country will manage to overcome especially these threats that these terrorist attacks are bringing to us.
Thank you. And thank you so much for highlighting those complex challenges that you're facing. And we're extremely sorry to hear about those troubles it's something that highlighting the complexity of working with the private sector, and then needing to bring in civil society and to bring in the voices of ordinary populations who are dealing with multiple risks simultaneously is truly a complex challenge. And thank you for bringing that to us. We have some opportunity now to look at the questions that are being posed from our audience that are fairly wide-ranging. And I would encourage the panelists to look at the Q&A, but I'm going to actually just start off, if you don't mind, I will start off with Anita and ask her if she could perhaps address this couple of questions that are there with regard to how to deal with the right to remedy in the context of COVID-19, or in fact other forms of restrictions on access, as you might hear, if territory is insecure due to terrorist activity or other. How can the principles be flexible enough to support different types of responses, to support remedy and legal aid in those contexts? There's a related question about how the business and human rights principles function in conflict settings and post-conflict settings, and the degree of relevance there. It would be great if you could also perhaps address that one. And then I will come to the other colleagues to talk about potentially links to corruption and access to justice also. First of all, over to you, Anita.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. Just a couple of quick points. On the issue of access to remedy, during these times of either conflict or times during the pandemic where remedy is not readily available, courts may be shut, may not be functioning, I think the guiding principles provide us with a tool. They say that both states as well as the private sector have an underlying obligation to provide effective remedy, and what that means may change in different settings, right? So what we're asking courts to do in situations like this is to think about what it means when judges move online for people who don't have access to technology and what should be done to provide for them. But these challenges are different, but they're no different than, again, in today's world where getting to a courthouse in many countries of the world is very difficult and onerous for rights holders anyway. So we also have in the guiding principles non-judicial remedy. And this is where, again, through national human rights institutions, national contact points, these other kinds of flexible mechanisms, we actually have an opportunity to be more nimble and to provide other kinds of remedy outside of formal court. So I would just say the guiding principles really press states to keep thinking about when you shut down a courthouse, what does that mean? Similarly, companies are meant to have operational level grievance mechanisms. So it's not just the role of the state, but businesses need to think about what it means to provide rights to remedy to workers during COVID-19 and how to reach them effectively. On the area of conflict, I'm just pleased to say that the UN Working Group will release a report at the General Assembly this fall, focusing on how the guiding principles are relevant in conflict, post-conflict, and peace-building settings. And what we find is that businesses and again, governments will invite investment in conflict and post-conflict settings with the idea of economic growth, but not thinking through what's the extra due diligence that's needed when you're dealing with a situation that's very fragile. So that business needs to actually understand the conflict context, understand the negotiations that have gone on for peace, and think about not only how it can contribute to positive growth, but how it can do no harm. So that's what's really important. And I'm not going to spell it all out here, but just to say we're really excited to share a roadmap, and thank UNDP for its partnership in developing that roadmap.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I also just want to highlight that yesterday we had a session around access to justice in these times. And in the next session, we're going to be talking about how we are embracing or working through this rapid digital transformation to enable remedies for communities. It's definitely not all easy, but we're trying to showcase lots of different examples which are being led at the national level through community organizations and through UNDP's support. So any participants here who want to check the YouTube videos from yesterday or join us in the next session, you're very welcome. The challenges are manifold due to the human rights risks embedded also within use of technology, but we need to proceed and to learn and improve as we move forward. I want to just also now perhaps to throw, I'm very interested to hear, Shubha, any reflections you would have on the connections between this work and how to address corruption at the same time. And also there is a very specific question for Coca-Cola in the list with regard to community groundwater depletion. I have no doubt that you're familiar with taking these questions, so it would be great if you could address those. Any observations that you would also have on how to support your partners and stakeholders in seeking remedies at the same time would also be very interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, so I'll go for the water first. So as a beverage company, we truly understand the importance of water to our communities. And a very important area of our whole work, in the area of sustainability is water stewardship. In fact, there is a whole range of, work that happens under it. First of all, there is a focus on the water that is used within our manufacturing for, the water that is used, which goes into the beverages and the manufacturing of the product. So there are steps taken to improve the water use efficiency. There is, work which is happening, which ensures that, the water that is used, the wastewater, is also efficiently used. There is recharge, a whole lot of work happening on, giving back to nature whatever we have taken for the manufacturing of our beverages. So in India specifically, for example, we have Coca-Cola Anandana Foundation, and I'd encourage the person who raised the question to see our website, where it is working in the remote water stretch areas to recharge groundwater. So this is a big area of our work, and we're happy to say that we've actually put back more water than we have taken. As a beverage industry, for example, we are not the biggest users of water. Beverage is a smaller user of water as compared to other industries, but we do understand the importance of this work. The second thing is about the grievance redressal. As a company, we have a number of ways of redressal of grievances. So, for example, a big area of our due diligence is the third-party auditing that we do of all our supplier and bottler locations worldwide. This gives there's one important component of these third-party assessments, which is the confidential worker interviews, and that gives an opportunity to raise issues and grievances, and so this is a very, very big exercise that happens. Apart from that, stakeholder engagement again is an important area of work. We kind of engage globally, locally with stakeholders. There are at times early issues which come to our notice at the global level, that there are certain issues which need our attention. So there again, that's another way of grievance redressal. Apart from that, for example, I'll give you an example of land rights. When it came to be known to us that there were land grabbing in deep supply chain, in the sugar supply chain, as I mentioned, we immediately took that as feedback. We tried to understand the issue at that point. This is something called Behind the Bans campaign against 10 sugar buying brands, and we took the advantage of Landesa's deep knowledge. We first understood, we included it immediately in our policies, our processes, and in our sugar work, for example, in the 21 countries where we did the due diligence, we specifically included land rights as an area of our due diligence. So this is a huge exercise that happens, and there are opportunities. Internally also, we have anonymous helpline where employees can raise issues. So this is an important area of work which we are we focus on.
Thanks. Just one follow-up there. I think that one of the questions that we have there on the chat is around incentives for businesses, and whether incentives work or whether mandatory regulations are relevant. Would you have any observations on that for the audience?
Yeah. See, as a responsible business, which focuses hugely on listening to our stakeholders, we have not waited for regulation really. So when regulation came, it's not been a step change for us. So to give you an example of modern slavery, in 2007, 2008, which is much before the first, slavery, the California Transparency or the UK Slavery Act came, our auditing in the Gulf region started getting us red alerts that there were issues that were there in this whole what later came into spotlight about the passport retention. In those days, the international attention was not so much, but we immediately, when we got to know these red flags, we had a study done. We understood what is this whole issue, what is the passport problem, and then we got to know that there are three dimensions of modern slavery. We immediately kind of incorporated prohibited forced labor in our supply chains. We included it in our auditing protocol, and then we joined the leadership group on responsible recruitment to publicly commit to the three principles of ethical recruitment. Now, we didn't stop there. So as our due diligence and as a responsible company, we've started kind of trying to get deeper and deeper understanding. So recently, last year, we piloted using blockchain, tried to kind of address the issue of contract substitution. And then we also realized that, and this pilot was very successful. It was, blockchain is a very secure registry where you cannot change the contract. But we also understood that, these kind of issues of forced labor do not happen actually in the source country, that is from where the foreign migrant workers come, rather than really at the receiving country where they come into, the global supply chains. And so our plan was that we expand the pilot. We couldn't do it because of COVID. We want to continue it, but we were looking at doing an end-to-end where we go to the place where the contracts happen. It doesn't happen in the receiving country, but in the source country, and start doing due diligence. So what I'm trying to say, the long and short of it is, if one is a responsible company, then you do the right thing. You have your due diligence, and you don't really wait, for legislation to happen. And when it happens, you're really in a good position to meet it. It's not really a change.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Dr. Makassar for his observations listening to you. But you've listened to the UN Working Group, and you listened to a representative of the private sector. Tell us your reflections on the challenges of looking at the relationships with corruption, which is particularly relevant, I think, for the extractive industries that you are working with. And whether the observations resonate with you with regard to those types of grievances that you hear from the people that you work with, and any particular insights in how to access remedies for those grievances would be really helpful from the perspective of, in particular, of what national human rights institutions can do. It would be great to hear from you on those points. Thank you. If you could just unmute Dr. Makassar, please. We can't hear you. Thank you.
Okay, it's fine. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I was thinking, looking on the grievances that can happen, I think that at this moment we do have two national institutions here, national human rights institutions, the Ombudsman as well as the Commission, Human Rights Commission, whereby their work has been very important, especially on looking on the issues that's happening where the companies and other businesses are dealing with the communities. So I think that these issues on corruption and as well as solving the situations that can be overcome by these institutions. So what I'm saying here is that these institutions are the one that can help by trying to bring the issues to the authorities as to help solving those situations. I give here an example. There were some issues in Tete, province of Tete, where some population have been pushed up from their local
I think we're losing Dr. Makassar. Is that correct? Yes, okay. Hermes, if you could potentially connect with him so that he can rejoin potentially without a video, that would be great. And what I'm going to do is I just want to turn to Anita because we need to anyway wrap up the Q&A. I just want to turn to you to see if you have any final observations on the critical themes that have been mentioned around links to corruption, links to mandatory regulation. This would be particularly useful. And then I will turn over to Livio, who will host a video, and we will hear the launch from ASG Okai. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie. Just 2 quick points. On the issue of incentives versus mandatory regulation, I think, again, we're seeing different methods and we really need a combination. The European Union is moving towards mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence, and that will have a big impact on how business operates in the EU and beyond. But we also see other ways of using procurement and trade promotion and other kinds of incentives as well to get governments, but businesses to respect human rights. So I think the guiding principles say we need all mandatory plus incentives. The second point on corruption, and the working group has just released a report on the connections between business and human rights and anti-corruption. These are 2 important areas. And I would just say in that report, we have very key action-oriented recommendations for states with respect to policy reform. Shiba mentioned land, for example, as one area where there's a lot of issues around corruption and human rights abuse, but also recommendations for business. And we'll have specific events throughout July focusing much more on what that really means in terms of integration of these agendas. So thank you.
Dr. Makassar, so we lost you for one moment. I'm afraid we lose time then, but I'd just like to give you 1 minute. And Livio is ready to put up a video on business and human rights as you do that. So please, we want you to conclude your point. Please do.
Thank you. I was just saying that, as I said before, the guiding principles, there are already principles that are enshrined within treaties and conventions that the state itself is already part to. So if the state is obliged somehow to also fulfill these principles. So when situations like corruption or other overcome, so the state is able to enforce them. Is also able, the National Commission on Human Rights as well as Ombudsman, also to enforce these grievances that can happen within the businesses and when human rights are violated. So there is also an example, as I was here giving an example, that in Tete, when these companies that didn't comply with their responsibility due diligence with the people, then came up the commission with a report on what was happening, and the company were obliged to do what they had to do. So this is the way. So the first thing is that these principles are already enshrined in instruments that the state already is part of, so it has to apply for it.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So thank you all to the panelists. I don't want you to go away. I would like to draw your attention to the Q&A because there's a lot of conversation there and you have a lot of rich material to share. Meanwhile, I'd like Hermes and Livio to share with us the video and then for us to move in to those presentations. Please, colleagues.
Thank you, Katie. We are a little bit behind schedule, so without further ado, I will ask Hermes to share the video.
The Asia-Pacific region has long benefited from pro-growth policies, foreign investment, and a strong labor force. Millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, but the gains have come at a cost, especially for human rights. In some countries, economic growth has been accompanied by significant human rights abuses by business operations. In the past, responsibility for addressing human rights abuses by business operations has been the subject of fierce debates. All that changed in 2011 with the introduction of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that were unanimously adopted by the Human Rights Council. The Guiding Principles provide a framework to address and improve human rights standards in the business sector. They define the state's duty to protect human rights in business operations, a business's responsibility to respect human rights, and for both to provide remedies for when violations occur. The Guiding Principles provide a way for businesses to contribute to the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. For example, anti-discrimination policies at the workplace that boost gender equality and empower women in support of SDG 5. Monitoring and auditing of supply chains to eradicate forced labor. As a result, businesses create good work opportunities and support economic growth in support of SDG 8. As businesses set up grievance mechanisms and complaint systems to respect rights, they prevent disputes from turning into crises and conflicts, contributing to SDG 16. UNDP is focused on promoting the UN's guiding principles by providing technical advice to governments, developing policies, due diligence processes and remedies for businesses, and supporting civil society organizations and human rights defenders to improve accountability. UNDP is strengthening both businesses and human rights to promote a sustainable future.
Thank you. I'd like to now ask our ASG, Asako Okai, to take the floor to introduce the UNDP initiative. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Katie. Distinguished fellow panelists, representatives of member states, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the session has been fascinating. Allow me to begin by thanking our keynote speaker, Professor Anita Lamsatri, for her inspiring analysis of the past, present, and future of business and human rights. I would also like to thank our discussant, Ms. Shekhar and Dr. Makasa for their reflections on the need to make the business and human rights agenda a common one for governments, business, and civil society. The importance of responsible business practices has been heightened by the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Recent estimates are that up to 100 million people could be pushed globally into extreme poverty, and that 195 million people could lose their jobs. While some businesses have acted responsibly, ensuring that their workers' salaries are paid and labor rights respected, others have resorted to cost-cutting, deprioritizing respect for human rights standards in trying to protect their bottom line. Even more disconcertingly, the COVID-19 crisis may yet prove to be a dress rehearsal for the risks and negative impact that may be wrought by climate-induced disasters that are on the horizon. History has shown that a crisis can profoundly shift thinking about how economies are governed. If policymakers and investors, activists, and entrepreneurs across the globe join forces to stop the reversal and push forward, we have reason for hope. To counter the pandemic and its attendant effects, UNDP mobilized its efforts to help build back better with its integrated COVID-19 response offer beyond recovery toward 2030. Our network of 170 country offices will serve UNDP's role as a UN technical lead in the socio-economic recovery effort with 4 areas in focus: governance, social protection, green economy, and digital disruption. Progress on each of these work streams will rely heavily on a proactive role to be played by business actors. Now more than ever, forward-looking investors and companies recognize that business cannot sit idly on the sidelines as governments and civil society alone grapple with how to assist vulnerable people in times of the crisis. Many corporations have already risen to the occasion, preparing hotels for medical use, switching manufacturing to masks and other PPE, and donating to public responses. However, businesses are called to move beyond corporate social responsibility to ensure human rights are respected in their labor force, avoid negative impact on the rights of their customers, and in the communities where they operate. This message has consistently been conveyed by the UN since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda that recognized the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights as one of its means of implementation. Indeed, it has been reiterated when we embarked on the SDG Decades of Action. UNDP has been supporting responsible business practices since 2016, when we started a regional program on business and human rights in Asia. I'm very pleased to announce today a scaling up of our operations in this sector with the launch of a global initiative on business and human rights as an integral part of our rule of law and human rights program. The Global Initiative on Business and Human Rights will build on the expertise, partnerships, and methodologies generated through our work in Asia and be informed by extensive baseline research work already conducted in other regions. Operationalized in incremental phases over the next 18 months, our support to the implementation of the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights is designed to impact on 4 major fronts. First, it will support governments in developing and implementing national action plans on business and human rights. UNDP has been engaged in supporting 6 such processes in Asia, and it will broaden these efforts to member states in all of other regions: Africa, Europe and Central Asia, Latin America, and then Caribbean and Arab states. Second, UNDP will aim to strengthen access to justice and access to adequate remedies for victims of business-related human rights abuses. In doing so, UNDP will build on its existing support to national human rights institutions under the tripartite partnerships, while deepening its engagement with civil society groups, judiciaries, and bar associations. Third, UNDP will provide advice to corporations on how to assess and address human rights risks in their supply chains. This is particularly pressing in light of the devastating impact of the COVID-19 has had on workers, communities, and vulnerable groups. It is for this reason that the UNDP has already developed a tool called the Human Rights Due Diligence Rapid Self-Assessment for Companies, which helps businesses manage the human rights impact of their operations during and after the pandemic. I'm pleased to note that this self-assessment kit is translated into 9 languages already. Fourth, UNDP will continue to provide opportunities for peer learning for government officials, businesses, national human rights institutions, civil society groups, and others. The latest such opportunity was the Responsible Business and Human Rights Forum for Asia Pacific, organized online earlier this month in June by UNDP. This forum have proved to be invaluable in exchanging key information, in allowing groups to learn from each other and to strategize together on tackling abuses by businesses particularly as they are frequently transnational in character. In implementing the global initiative, UNDP will deepen its existing partnership with key actors in the business and human rights sphere. Foremost among these is the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. We have had a very successful partnership to date, for which I would like to thank Anita and other working group members, and our collaboration will expand in the coming 12 months. In the context of project on the next decade of implementation of the UNGPs, to which Professor Ramsatri made reference in her keynote speech, we will jointly host regional consultations which will guide the development of the roadmap on business and human rights. UNDP's network, which counts 5 regional offices and 170 country offices, will be used to ensure all relevant stakeholders, including representatives of vulnerable and marginalized groups, such as indigenous people and migrant workers, are consulted globally on the way forward for the next 10 years. UNDP is embarking on this global initiative, counting on strong partnership with other notable partners, including OHCHR, ILO, UN Women, and UNICEF and OECD. Concerted action and policy coherence in the field of responsible business and human rights will be a common objective. To sum up, I would also like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the government of Sweden, the European Union, and then Federal Republic of Germany for their support to our business and human rights work so far, particularly in Asia. We hope to be able to expand these partnerships worldwide, convene and support this growing community of like-minded actors that are convinced that more sustainable business trajectories are possible. I hope you share our enthusiasm for the opportunity to turn this moment of great reversal of human development into an historic leap forward with the Sustainable Development Goals as our compass. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General Asako. I take the liberty to just jump right in and greet indeed the 3 panelists that spoke before you. Much has been said about my connection with Dr. Al-Bashir, which is really a pleasure to see there. He's the one who spread the business and human rights fever to me, which I took with me in Asia and spread it. And I do hope in this case it's highly contagious and we have soon a business and human rights pandemic. So in that context, in context of what our director Asako mentioned on the scaling up of UNDP activities, we did come a long way since the work in Africa. And indeed, we have made a lot of progress already in Asia. Let me give you, with 3 images, a little bit more details on the operational aspects of this scaling up. So the map that you see in here is the map that shows the current capacity of our business and human rights work. You can see that it's a lot more populated on the Asia side. It was said before, this is where the program started. We started in Southeast Asia, moved progressively to South Asia, where a lot of things are happening here. And you see things populating also in Northern Africa, in Tunisia, and in the 4 dots, which actually presents the 4 regional offices that we have. We already have built capacity, initial capacities in Addis, in Panama, in Istanbul, and in Amman. We have also recently doubled our capacities in headquarters to sustain this global initiative. Let me also single out a little bit, as we are scaling up our work in regions, the fact that Africa is the region where we have already invested a good amount of resources and time. We have a baseline study, which was conducted over the last 6 months, that has highlighted already 12 countries in the continent that have good opportunities to be doing business and human rights work. A baseline assessment is ongoing also in Eastern Europe, and one will start soon also in the Arab states part. So a lot of studying work that will become work on the ground, operational work by the end of this year or beginning of 2021. In the next slide, I will very quickly go over again the four main areas of our work in Asia and then eventually globally for the global initiative. The first one looks at our technical advice and support the governments. It's a bit of the bread and butter of UNDP. Through our contacts with our country offices, we've done in Asia and will be doing globally a lot of advocacy with the governments to embrace the UNGPs and then support their efforts to come up with business and human rights policy. As a second point, we will have in all regions those regional peer learning capacity building activities, the regional forums as they are called, that we have already successfully held in Asia. So we will look at regional and sub-regional opportunity to bring together all the stakeholders. The third aspect will focus on the second pillar, on the business sector. We'll focus on helping companies in their human rights due diligence policies and in coming up with business and human rights policies. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, we're very proud of the work we have done with NHRIs and with civil societies. In Asia, we will make sure that this remains a strong pillar of our global initiative. So working with the rights holders and making sure that they have access to remedies. One last slide for me, the business and human rights and responsible business scenario is very large, it's growing, it's been unpacked by the working group very well and is looking at many different aspects. To make sure we don't spread ourselves too thin, we have selected a few priorities, a few lenses that we plan to use more, and they are illustrated in these slides. The first doesn't need a lot of explanation because it's been mentioned already. National action plans, we think, are a key factor to gather the work of an entire nation, all the stakeholders around planning of business and human rights. We will definitely be working on national action plans wherever around the world there is an interest and in UNDP support for that. The second is human rights defenders. We have put an accent on this in Asia, and we will want to continue doing so everywhere, working with NHRIs and with civil society organizations, with those defenders on the ground that need to be protected, and at the same time are those that are most knowledgeable about what the issues are. So we will be working with companies to make sure that they actually use the human rights defenders, because they are those who better than anybody else knows what are the human rights risks that are facing. Third lens that we will be using is the environmental lens. Environmental rights are human rights. We will conjugate the work that UNDP is doing on environmental rights and on climate change with our work on business and human rights. I think there was a question on this in the chat. We can assure you that the UNDP environmental team and the business and human rights team will work very closely together. Fourth, an issue that has been again raised today, sustaining peace. Let me unpack this in two aspects. Our business and human rights work will look at remedies to make sure that those grievances don't scale up into actual conflicts, what unfortunately has happened and happens around the world. And at the same time, we'll look at what Anita was referring to. We'll look at those fragile contexts where businesses.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kavya. I'm joined here today by my colleague Hermes from Insight Fact. We will be your technical facilitator to ensure that you have a smooth experience using Zoom today. Welcome to the 2020 UNDP Annual Meeting, Strengthening the Rule of Law and Human Rights for Sustaining Peace and Fostering Development. This is session 5, titled Exploring the Potential of Digital Transformation. We will begin the session in just a few moments. Before we begin the session, we'd like to let you know what features are available today for you in Zoom. While the chat settings are disabled, you will be able to ask your questions through the Q&A function. You will be able to find the Q&A icon towards the bottom of your screen. Again, welcome to the 2020 UNDP annual meeting, Strengthening the Rule of Law and Human Rights for Sustaining Peace and Fostering Development. This is session 5, exploring the potential of the digital transformation. Again, welcome to the 2020 UNDP annual meeting. Please pay attention to the chat as our team will be posting regular announcements regarding the functions of Zoom that are available to you during today's session. I will now hand it over to today's moderator, Dr. Sam Muller, CEO and founding director of the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law. Dr. Muller, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And this event for me is innovation. I've never addressed such a large audience in this way. Welcome, everybody. What I will do in these first 7-8 minutes is provide some foundation, as I see it, for the discussion that we're going to have. All the speakers will then address a particular topic, and after that we will have a good 25 minutes, I hope, for questions and answers. You will all know that last year the Task Force for Justice published a report in which they showed, and my institute was one of the partners in working on the data for that report, that the access to justice gap in the world is huge. What it also showed is that we actually don't have all that much data, but by pulling together different sources, we were able to come up with something of a figure. And the estimation of the task force is that 5.1 billion people don't have access to justice, of which 253 million people live in extreme conditions of injustice. 4.5 billion are excluded from the opportunity of the law provides simply because they technically don't exist. And then there's about 1.5 billion people who do somehow theoretically have access to justice, but they don't really seem to be able to resolve their problem. And that is huge. And it's important, I think, that we remember that when we start this session. And also when you look at the areas where people have these problems, they're all in very essential relationships. Family problems, land problems, employment issues that have to do with livelihood, neighbor issues, consumer issues, access to public services, and crime. So a lot of the people that are in this huge group are people that suffer from a lack of access to justice in some shape or form in very, very key relationships, and that has an effect on society as a whole. Now we've got COVID, and more is being demanded of justice systems, while the resources to do that with are becoming less. Government budgets will be reduced, there's no doubt about that. And we may even, some may even be losing some people. Now, the only way that we know historically in which you could do more with less resources is by innovation. Finding new ways of doing it. And we see it now. It was only when we could not fly all over the world for at an affordable price all the time that we started seriously thinking of doing meetings such as these online. I would argue that people-centered justice, as set up by the task force, has to be an integral part of the crisis response. Resolving justice problems, preventing justice problems, and creating opportunities for people to participate fully in their economies and their societies. Without that, the public health and the economic measures that are being taken will not maintain the legitimacy and the support that they need. Trust and social cohesion will suffer and dwindle, and rebuilding the economy will not work. So we need innovation. I hope I'm not going to offend anybody by saying that the justice sector, at least the way that I've experienced it in my professional life, has just not been very good at innovation. I mean, why are they the last ones to go online, generally speaking, in most countries? Why was it such a disaster in so many countries that everything is still on paper and that almost everything requires physical presence? Why did most courts, including in my own country, and law firms close, leaving people with no way forward at the beginning of the COVID crisis? And why has access to health and education consistently gone up in the past decades, while access to justice has not? In fact, I would argue it's declining. Now, our focus should be on system change, and I hope we could explore that a little bit here, not just looking at the little things, the practical things that work, but also system change. We've got to make justice systems more innovative in a systemic way, so that during COVID, during the economic crisis that's now unfolding, and long after that, they have innovation capacity and improvement built into them. Now, for that, I would say 4 things are important. I'd like to hear more about that when we have our discussion. The first thing is that the outcomes that people want should be center stage. That is one of the core things of people-centered justice. And that is what they did in the health sector. It doesn't matter how many hospitals you build or how many schools you build. What counts is how many people are getting better or not getting diseases, how many children are actually learning, and in our case, how many justice is actually being delivered and how many justice problems are actually being prevented. And in order to work to get those outcomes, you need what I sometimes call an IPCC for justice. The whole climate change revolution was driven by data, by knowing what was happening where, by knowing what was working to deal with it. So somehow we need data about the needs and the experiences of those that need justice all over the world. And we need to start building systems that collect those in a much better way than we are doing now, and integrating that data into decision making. I just got out of a session a few hours ago with some of the justice leaders in Nigeria and with one of the attorney generals of one of the states. We're talking exactly about that. How can I know what's going on, where the needs are, what is working, and how can I integrate that into my system? So data is the first. Data on what the experience and needs of people are, and data on what is working. The second is, and you may have some experience with that, speakers, you need places where people who have really good ideas for innovations could go and talk about these ideas and be helped to scale. Places where the things that we know work can actually be made better. And it's fair to say that generally speaking, ministries of justice have not been the best places in the world to go to with a good idea. We have an annual Innovating Justice Award, and every year we ask our innovators, how many of you have gotten to where you are thanks to fantastic help from your Ministry of Justice? And in fact, most of them have found it difficult to work with them. And that's not because ministries of justice are bad, but it's simply because it's not something they're necessarily used to. So I think we need to create places, just like you have in the health sector, accelerators, innovation hubs, public-private partnerships, where good ideas could be brought to so that they could be helped to scale. The third is you need strategies for smart financing. Here too, business as usual will not work. Justice budgets worldwide were always limited, and governments, especially in lower income countries, will not be able to finance what is needed, especially as the economic consequences of the lockdowns become apparent and economic recession starts. So we somehow need to find out ways in which we could fund these great ideas that come to these places, and business and philanthropic foundations should be brought in, but also, of course, the public sector. And that will require new innovative thinking to come up with sustainable funding models. And lastly, I would say you need places where leaders and decision makers could meet, connect, and lead. new ways of convening that don't really exist now. This crisis will only be dealt with if we find the diversity of actors together and can bring them together to make the decisions that are necessary. And as part of this meeting, it's also important that we find ways to create a more level playing field. It is also something that is a constant experience from our work with Justice Innovators and our own Justice Accelerator and the annual award that we hand out, that it is hard to come into the justice delivery market as a newcomer. It is a very regulated, very closed market, and somehow we need to find a way to open that. Those are my opening and hopefully framing remarks. We have 5 speakers today who are all working very, very hard on the challenge of innovation and digital transformation. Mr. Robert Opp, the Chief Digital Officer of UNDP, Mr. Samuel Doe, UNDP Resident Representative, Sierra Leone, Mrs. Inka Matila, the UNDP Resident Representative in the Dominican Republic, Mrs. Dafina Gercheva and Alexander Baranov of the UNDP Ukraine, the Res Rep and the head of legal aid coordination, and Revai Albeck, who is the head of the effective governance team in UNDP Fiji, and who is, I think, living on 1 a.m. in the morning or something like that. So talk about a huge sacrifice that she's making for this cause. Each of these speakers will speak for about 8 minutes, and we've all agreed that we will stick to that. And after that, we will have a Q&A session of about 25 minutes, and then I will close the session. So with that, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Robert, on UNDP's digital strategy and justice innovation strategy. I suppose that's what it is. Sorry, I may not have got the title right. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moeller. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, wherever you are. As Dr. Moeller said, my name is Robert Opp. I'm the Chief Digital Officer from UNDP. And I am going to give a bit of a scene setter in terms of the interaction between digital technologies and the rule of law. So if I could just have the first slide advanced, please. So the first thing to note is that the kind of, in an innovation or digital process, you always want to focus on the problem you're trying to solve. And of course, for us as the United Nations Development Program, the problems we're trying to solve are embodied by the SDGs. And we do believe that there is tremendous opportunity to apply digital technologies, digital transformation to help us achieve the SDGs. Our Secretary General has been very clear on this about the role of innovation and digital in helping us accelerate in this last decade of action to achieving the SDGs. Next slide, please. One of the issues to note is that there are extremely powerful technologies that are emerging. And of course, we're familiar with these around artificial intelligence and blockchain, the big data analytics. But it's not just the individual technologies, it is actually the convergence of technologies that is becoming such a powerful platform. So when you have a smartphone that is internet connected, you can be receiving some of the most powerful technologies in the world, services that are powered by them at your fingertips, anywhere in the world where you have connectivity. Next slide. And as Dr. Moeller noted, the issue of COVID has really accelerated a lot of our digital thinking. And that is both in terms of, I would say, positive forces, but also some of the challenges and risks around technology. We know that governments around the world have raced to embrace technology to address COVID, both in terms of response as well as being able to support social distancing measures. And there's a lot of acceleration in our own organizations, our own communities. At the same time, there's lots of challenges that are emerging around data privacy and the way to protect people who are using and exposed to new technologies. So COVID is really serving as a strong digital accelerator. Next slide, please. Now, UNDP, just to take a quick pause here, started investing and looking at digital transformation, well, actually for a number of years now, but that translated into a digital strategy that was created in early 2019, which is really the first of its kind in the UN system and really aimed at trying to support the organization to move into a position where we can support our partners with the digital thinking, the digital technologies, platforms, the systems change related to digital that Dr. Moeller was talking about. The UNDP digital strategy is broken into two pathways. The first pathway is around how we actually, sorry, if you just go back one slide. The first pathway is around how we actually change our programs, rethink, reimagine the way that we support our partners. And the second pathway is how we change our internal system and look at modernizing the organization. So this is the digital strategy for UNDP, and it really has served us well as we've gone into this COVID era where we've really had to change the way that the organization is embracing digital to do our work. Next slide, please. Now, a couple of observations here around digital and the rule of law. What we're seeing is tremendous creativity and innovation in the use of digital innovations for supporting rule of law. So we see all sorts of new channels of availability for whether it's just basic websites or reaching people with chatbots or getting better trainings, outreach to officials in remote areas. It's helping us increase the efficiency of justice systems. It's around really looking at how we have heavy paper-based systems and making it more efficient just through digitization. It's about really increasing the transparency through digital means so that you're having greater transparency over what's put into systems, how things are recorded. Being able to access legal identity and documentation online so that you don't have to either make the journey to a government office or you're not, you have openness and around the digital access to those things. It's helping us collect more data, more jurisprudence, helping improve our case management. And at a very basic level, when we go to a digital finance kind of era, we see a reduction in corruption around payments so that the safety and security of those payments are really increased. At the same time, though, the use of those kinds of digital technologies cannot be separated from the need for a strong rule of law itself. So it's a really mutually reinforcing aspect. We must look at how we protect individual freedoms at a point where some of the technologies are really invasive. And so a good case in point is the contact tracing applications and things that have been developed for COVID. There are very serious privacy considerations around those and how governments or other authorities that are adopting them ensure that through rule of law, that the individual privacies and protections are put in place. There has to be careful management of access to information if you're going to make information available. We need to look at the digital divide because that is a problem in case, if you're making digital technologies available, unless you're actually able to benefit from those. If you're on the wrong side of the digital divide, that is a major challenge for about 45% of the world's population still. Then there's issues around hate speech and intolerance that when you have digital technologies, we actually see a proliferation of that. And just as I mentioned before, around data privacy in general. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, COVID has been a digital accelerator, and the rule of law, justice system support is no exception to that. So we see the business continuity aspects of court systems, justice systems being supported by remote working solutions. So UNDP has been involved in helping courts stay in business over a time when people are in social distancing mode. I mentioned before the issue of misinformation, which has become rife in the era of COVID, particularly through social media platforms. So how can we fight against that? And we've seen initiatives and measures put in place to work toward that, but they're not sufficient in many cases. And then lastly, really we're seeing that exacerbation of the digital divide, because if there are COVID response mechanisms that are being put forward through a connected platform, those who are on the wrong side of the digital divide are unable to access them. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I just wanted to mention a few things. UNDP is seeing, as I mentioned, many creative responses, from citizen feedback platform that we've seen emerge in Indonesia, to an app where domestic violence can be reported, to a MyGov portal that has been developed by the Ministry of Justice in Georgia. A fantastic example of moving things online into a kind of mode where people can access from remote areas in an era of social distancing. So I do just conclude by saying, Dr. Muller, I think, is absolutely right. Although we can see lots of these examples, what we need to look toward is how they fit into a broader system. And the two things, digital technology and rule of law, are truly mutually reinforcing. And unless we have that systemic approach to the overall rule of law environment, we will not be able to make best use out of the digital technologies and experimentation that we see. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. And it's really good that you set the stage with some of these important systemic questions that have to be dealt with. Now let's move to some of the ideas coming from different countries, initiatives, things that are happening there. And I'd like to first go to Sierra Leone, to a man who bears the same name as I do, Sam. I will call him Sam1 and give him the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Sam2. I'll give that to you just for today. And thanks to all of the colleagues for the opportunity for UNDP Sierra Leone to contribute to this conversation. As all of you, or some of you may know, Sierra Leone suffered a terrible civil war. It was over a decade-long civil war, which killed over 50,000 of its citizens, and fundamentally destroyed a lot of the societal systems, including a system of access of justice and the rule of law. And in retrospect, many would say that was, to some extent, not the war, but the questioning and the disruption of the systems that existed was, in part, a good thing, because it created an opportunity for the society to rethink, to reflect, and rebuild new and better systems. And one of those systems, according to the Truth Commission, that was the catalyst or the major driving force for the war, was the near non-existence of access to justice and the rule of law. And so since the end of the war, UNDP and many other institutions have been supporting the government and people of Sierra Leone to establish better foundation and new systems for access to justice and the rule of law. And in 2017, building on reforming laws, rebuilding institutions, UNDP focused on the administration of justice in 2017 with support from the U.S. Department of State, the Bureau of International Narcotic and Law Enforcement Affairs, INL. UNDP got resources, generous support from the U.S. government for a project promoting transparency in Sierra Leone's judiciary. And part of that project was to really look at how the administration of justice is being undertaken in Sierra Leone. And one of the things that was found here is the management of cases. And the idea was then to establish and operationalize what we are now calling the Justice App. The Justice App had four main objectives. One was to digitize all of the paper-based case management system that Dr. Muller was talking about in Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone has a really difficult case management system, largely because of documentation, record keeping, and even access to records. And so digitizing all of the records in all of the courts across the country was one of the goals of the app. And also to help relieve the backlog. Recently in 2018, the Justice Minister put out a study in which she indicated that over 70% of cases in Sierra Leone are not charged to court in time, largely because of these administrative bottlenecks, access to documents and records, and the capacity of judicial institutions. So helping to relieve the backlog was one of the objectives of this of the Justice App. And also to promote transparency, because the Justice App, with all of the cases being uploaded on the app, and all judges have access to the app on the telephone, can monitor cases across the country, including the Chief Justice. And that transparency allows the Chief Justice to help achieve the other, and the judges to achieve the fourth objective, which is accountability and robust monitoring of cases across the country. Next slide, please. So the app, the functionality of the app is a fast-track case management. It facilitates trial processes, hearing and sentencing and monitoring, and as I said, harmonizing all of the bail and sentencing processes across the country. The app works offline. We give each of the judges a telephone on which the app is mounted, and all of the cases are uploaded, so they can operate the app even if it is not online. And the judges and the Chief Justice themselves can monitor and call judges to see progress on cases across the country. It's been 2017 since we launched this app. It's been a resounding success. A number of countries are learning from UNDP Sierra Leone on how to apply this mechanism also in their own country. But some of the key achievements, we have now a platform that is a one-stop shop where everybody can go and see these cases and to assess, to monitor, and see the implementation of the cases. And primarily, we think this is also contributing to SDG 16, which is largely access to justice component of SDG 16. It promotes access to justice for the vulnerable people. The emphasis is women women and children. Major problem in Sierra Leone is sexual and gender-based violence. And to monitor these cases, which are very sensitive cases, the app is used to really track, to advocate, to nudge on the judiciary to have speedy trial on these cases. The streamline and reduces delays, really outrageous delays in the case management system in Sierra Leone. And it also provides a better, as I said, monitoring and evaluation system and data that everybody, especially the judges, can refer to on the click of a button. Currently, there are 80 judges that have access, that have the platform, have the telephone, judges, magistrates that are using the app regularly, and over 800 cases now are now imported in the app, are digitized and can be accessed using the app. There's a full integration of the app now with the Sierra Leone Correctional Service Crime Sync. The idea is there is an app for the correctional service being developed by another agency. We are now working on the interoperability of the Crime Sync and the Justice app so that remand cases can be addressed quickly. It enables the judicial officers to report trial happening at the same time, so they can, on real life, monitor and document these trials that are ongoing. And it also helps in the coordination of the rule of law and access to justice, especially in the COVID situation. And specifically on COVID, what UNDP has done in Sierra Leone in order to mitigate the risk, and because the correctional institution discouraged visitation, what we did, we bought telephones for every correctional institution in Sierra Leone, and 3, 4, depending on the size of the correctional center. And these telephones are used for the inmates. They have twice a day or 3 times a week to speak to the families outside of who no longer have opportunity to visit them. That is helping significantly to reduce anxiety, especially as these inmates do not hear from their family members. And in 2020, we ensured the vulnerable population in the correctional centers were protected. We are working with the correctional center and the judiciary for decongesting these centers. And lastly, in the decongestion, we're working on promoting virtual court system, and that process is ongoing. And we hope that it will be launched very soon. Those of you who follow Sierra Leone may have heard on the 29th of April, exactly as we were working to mitigate these risks of prison uproar as a result of COVID and the anxiety and stresses that COVID caused across society, and most especially in this restrictive environment. On the 29th of April, the largest correctional center, male correctional center in Sierra Leone, there was a riot because many of the prisoners suspected that there was rumor that one of the prisoners was positive, and they were all afraid. That led to the death of 12 prisoners, and one of the prison officers also got wounded, and several other prisoners were wounded. That tells you how the challenges with COVID in prison. We know that a significant number, over 20% of prisoners we hear are now, unfortunately, positive. So emphasizing and fast tracking the decongestion of the prisons using the virtual court will be an important, significant contribution to mitigating the anxiety and the impact of the anxiety in prison. So we're working closely on that. There are challenges. The app has been, when I go to see the Chief Justice, even the one before, they properly take out the gadget and say, we are monitoring, come and see, we're monitoring these cases across the country. They properly use the app, and so we're quite confident in terms of the satisfaction of the judiciary on the use of the app. But there are still challenges. One is the level of, as Dr. Mola said, the judicial system across the world is very, very conservative. And so this leap into innovation, into technology, sometimes is confronted with resistance. And so some of the judges, the magistrates that exist, a lot of education is happening to reduce the reluctance in taking the leap to innovation and technology. There is skepticism, especially as the COVID crisis continued, in whether these cases can be speedily tried. Delays in the incorporating of the Justice app in the training institute of the Legal Training Institute curriculum is a challenge, but we are working closely with the new Chief Justice to surmount that challenge, to make sure there is a dedicated course on the IT course in the Legal Training Institute that will look at how the usability and the effectiveness of the app. We believe very soon we will get the virtual courts happening for the decongestion, and we think this will also strengthen the integrity and the transparency in the judicial system in Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is one of the few countries in Africa now that has a dedicated directorate for innovation, science, and technology, assists directly in the office of the president. And we have signed, UNDP has signed an MOU with that directorate to take innovation across the whole of government, and using the lessons learned from the judiciary, the lessons learned from the Bank of Sierra Leone, where we have the credit app facility as well. These are being brought to bear in strengthening the whole of governance, innovation, and technology. We are looking forward. We've got another funding from IML that will help us expand the app so that it's not just the judges that have access to it, but civil society, the legal aid board can also have access to social accountability, and monitoring use from civil society can help enhance the objective of the speedy trial of cases, of the backlog of cases. And new judges have been, new judges have been recruited, and we are also working to training those in the use of the app. So broadly, these are the core areas of the success story around Justice App in Sierra. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam, for sharing this really practical, on-the-ground, change-making innovation. Next, we turn to the Dominican Republic. for which I would like to give the floor to the resident representative, Ms. Inka Matila.
Good morning from Dominican Republic, and thank you for this fantastic opportunity to showcase our experience to support the justice system transformation process and how actually COVID-19 has speeded it up, and to do everything, all this presentation in less than 10 minutes. That's the key challenge. May last year, the new president of the Supreme Court called me for a meeting to share his ambitious vision of a transition of the country's justice system that could be a reference even for the whole region. He asked UNDP to integrate as a strategic partner to the process, basically to impulse profound transformation, including strong digital component by 2024. 2-3 months ago, as a part of our integral revision of our program portfolio to assure its relevance in the COVID-19 context, the President of the Supreme Court concluded that in the times of COVID-19, we don't have 7 years for the transformation, but just maximum 2. The digitalization of the justice system needs to be accelerated, and the promise of the next generation UNDP with innovation at the center, combined with a strong operational capacity, needs to step in to accelerate the transformation. And this has been the expectation from our key partners' part. Next, please. What is the challenge here? Basically, we observe in Latin America and the Caribbean that the trust in government and the state institution is weak and declining. At the central of the distrust are reasons like lack of fairness, lack of performance, and lack of information. The justice system is not an exception. For example, just 3 each of 10 Dominicans trust in the justice system. 6 years ago, the figure was approximately 6 out of 10. Justice system, which is like the last hope for the people to seek justice. After the justice ruling, there's no normally other options. Distrust in this kind of service may be the worst kind of faults. If people don't have access to justice, and when they do have it, and the process is slow, bureaucratic, full of incomprehensive procedures, the perception the people have is that the justice services are not for them. Next one, please. Yes, we are in the correct one. The institutional strategy plan the Supreme Court suggested to transform the justice, this justice transformation, Justice 2024, is basically based on 3 pillars: justice for all, timely and efficient justice service, and integrity and reliable justice. This plan is not only about modernized justice, but also putting the people and their trust in the system at the center of the process. In this context, technology and going digital presents an important opportunity for changing how the citizenship experiences the justice system and for building the trust between citizens and the same institution. In case of the Dominican Republic, almost 80% of the population have some kind of access to internet, importantly through their smartphones. So this kind of also sets basis for going digital in more inclusive manner. The new era digital solutions are center of all 3 pillars in aspects like integrity and transparency, demonopolization of the information, identification of discretional decisions in the administrative part of the institutions, control and monitoring of all processes of procurement and contracts, and adequate attention to the management of human resources, for example. So basically, the whole issue of the digitalization goes through the internal processes up to the services, to the public and to the citizens. We are now in the correct slides. So how UNDP is stepping in? Our support is a combination of high-level technical advisory services, bringing UNDP's global, regional, and national knowledge that is basically our global policy network at the service of the transformation process on one hand, and on the other hand, UNDP offers transparent and timely operational support for the needed procurement processes, now obviously accelerated due to the COVID-19 context. UNDP's impeccable administration and the transparency seal is also a certain kind of guarantee for the Supreme Court who leads the process. So basically, my message here is this kind of possibility combine technical advisory with operational support, global, regional, and national aspects is very powerful offer for our partners in the countries. On the technical advisory side, UNDP brings in methodological support for the administration at of the justice at its highest level, including gathering data that was also mentioned by Sam in his introduction, and test new resolutions. For example, one example I want to share with you, we have started to model integrity dashboard as innovative solution to assure that the integrity would be more than good desire, but also backed up by concrete strategic actions responding to the citizen needs. Our acceleration innovation lab is also designing experiments how to make justice more inclusive, how the people are perceiving that they truly have access to justice. The operational support processes are related to the key needs of the digitalization, from digitalization of all files of the active cases, that is 600,000 files, and it goes up to the development of case management system. Basically, all these kind of procurement processes are jointly designed by UNDP and the Supreme Court teams, and we are bringing in also the UNDP's digital know-how in the design of these processes. Next one, please. Looking a bit more detail, the digital justice system, I don't want to scare you with this slide, and I'm not going to all the details for the reason of the time as well, but I do want to illustrate with this scheme the complete digitalized justice service thinking. To put this simple, I want to mention basically three key characteristics of this system and the blueprint for the digitalization process. The cloud. Entry and exits of all kind of information and documentation will be soon available in all of the phases of the justice processes. Second, open public directories. Who is who? The judges, the lawyers, the defenders, public prosecutors, and public officials. And third, permanent process of transparency and traceability of the information and documentation available to the citizens, so that they can follow up where their case is by using digital means. Yes, next one, we are in the correct one. The COVID-19 took all of us by surprise, including this justice transformation process. But instead of paralyzing the process, the complex context actually has accelerated it. With this slide, I want to basically demonstrate where we are at this moment, less than 4 months after the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. The green marks are the elements that are already implemented or under implementation or design of the initial 7-year digitalization part of the transformation plan. In addition to the initial plan, COVID-19 has also impulsed telework in unforeseen manner to guarantee business continuity. And actually now only after 4 months of the outbreak, many of the audiences are already virtual. The cloud is installed, the cloud for the documentation is installed, and the documents are already received online. And basically, for example, the directories are in full creation processes. So we truly are seeing a speeding up process. Next one, please. And to conclude, what I have described is a process underway in the context of huge challenges imposed by COVID-19. At the same time, going digital is actually accelerating the needed transformation processes. So it kind of is turning up to be an also opportunity for new type of more inclusive justice. The digitalization is far from being mere fact of modernization, but it can and should also be oriented as a mean to assure a real coverage and democratization of the justice services, in addition to access them in a transparent manner to leave no one behind. Finally, I would like to take advantage of the moment and invite all of you to share with possible ideas, suggestions, to think together also these solutions, to create new type of solutions in this enormously challenging process, making the world's inclusive productivity and transparency an institutional reality in the justice sector in Dominican Republic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inka. And from the Dominican Republic, we go to Ukraine, where we have two speakers. One is Alexander Baranov, who's the head of the Legal Aid Coordination Center of Ukraine. And the second is the Dafina Gercheva, who's the resident representative of UNDP in Ukraine. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam. First of all, thank you for invitation on the annual meeting and the possibility to present Ukrainian practice that we have now in country. If it's possible to switch on the presentation, I will continue on. Talking about digital transformation in Ukraine, I need to say that, first of all, I want to explain how the legal aid in Ukraine exists. In general, we have more than 500 offices all over Ukraine because we have primary legal aid, the thing that we're calling legal advisors, and secondary legal aid, it's representative and defense for our clients. In case of defense in criminal cases, all population is eligible for that kind of legal aid, and all population as well eligible for primary legal aid, it's legal advices or consultations. And we have approximately 77% of Ukrainian, it's vulnerable groups who are eligible for secondary legal aid, its presentation in courts. Talking about general overview and how we have to transform our usual process during COVID, we have to understand that we are a very huge system. During 2019, we have more than 80,000 cases in criminal law and more than 600,000 clients. Part of them, it's 65,000 clients who are represented in the courts, and more than 500,000 clients who received legal advices. Also, we're working and giving legal advices on toll-free line, and I need to say that all these work is supported by the legal empowerment that we are continuously, and legal empowerment activities that we are continuously making to explain for population of the Ukraine what the rights they have, how to defend their rights, and what to do in case their rights are violated. As you see on the screen, there is a very small detailization of quantity of cases by each vulnerable category that was done in 2019. So when we're talking about what we have done during the COVID, I would divide it into three parts. First one, it's legal empowerment activities that we've done. And as you see, before COVID in 2019, previously there were a lot of activities. And even that year, we've done more than 3,500 activities, events, in-person events. And from March 12, when quarantine was set up in Ukraine, we completely changed our approach to the legal empowerment activities. So we have started making the activities online. In Ukraine, the penetration of internet, it's more than 75%. And a lot of people are now taking new information about news, some new things from the internet, from social networks, and etc. So we have started online events in social networks. As you can see, is just 1.5 events and almost 600,000 views, participants who attended that events. We have special WikiLegal database that has consultations, so our clients can open the database, that wiki, and search for information for consultation. And concerning further development, now we decided to develop digital distance learning course for paralegals, and UNDP is helping us with that activity. Talking about primary legal aid, it's consultation, and previously it was done in person. So we completely changed for right now the process, but we're going to mix further the online process and offline process, because not always our clients coming to us just to receive the consultation. Very often we're working like psychologists to talk about the problem that people have. But right now we implement this consultation by Viber, by Telegram, by Facebook chat, and we implemented a special charts for chatbots that are created by police and Ministry of Digital Transformation. It's one bot that addressed to the victims of domestic violence. And another one, it's Stop Cyberbullying bot. So in both bots, we are giving legal advices to the person who need that. Previously, we have the application that was developed under the support of UNDP, and now we are going to present our own application in which we can give to all clients information about legal aid and some consultations. Further, we are going to create the cabinet where our client will be able to receive primary legal aid and submit for secondary legal aid application. So concerning secondary legal aid in general, it's not so a lot of innovations. The main one that we have started using Zoom to for mediation procedures in our pilot project Restorative Justice for Minors, and we are going further to participate in the courts through teleconference system. But mainly, this is not only depends on us, because secondary legal aid mostly depends on the courts, and we're looking forward for innovations that will be implemented by courts as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Great stuff that you're doing, and I know Ukraine as well as an amazing place where digital magic happens from some of the things that I've seen. Dafina, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Sam. Colleagues, I'm very pleased and I'm very happy to be today with you and to participate in this very timely and very important meeting. And I'm also very thankful for the given opportunity to share the experience of UNDP in Ukraine in leveraging the power of digital technologies for expanding the access to justice, especially at times of crisis such as COVID-19, which is global, which is deadly and multifaceted emergency. I would call this crisis also a great disruptor, and I would also emphasize the fact that COVID-19 is hitting hard on the key fundamentals of human development: income, health, and education. It is also exacerbating the complex and interrelated challenges which both developed and developing countries are facing, and ultimately it is calling for, if you will, a paradigm shift for challenging the status quo and also thinking out of the box. We have come to the realization that leapfrogging to a digital world after the crisis is not anymore a choice, it is an imperative. And to achieve this ambitious goal and recover back better and greener, countries should have people-centered and conducive legal environment, legal framework, client-centered, responsive, efficient, effective, and transparent institutions. But it is also very important to highlight that countries should have citizens with sound digital literacy who can access its services and benefit from digital technologies. Before I further proceed with my presentation, let me give you a bit of a background both on Ukraine's overall performance in the area of rule of law and digitalization, and on UNDP's response to the situation, with a particular focus on the most vulnerable and marginalized segments of society. Ukraine is faring well in terms of its electronic governance, according to the UN e-government survey, which was conducted in 2018. However, the country is falling behind by estimates of the rule of law index. Areas in the red zone include corruption in judiciary and police, improper influence of the government on justice, low accessibility and affordability of civil justice, as well as problems with ensuring the right to privacy. Despite these global level assessments, and as Alexander has already mentioned, Ukraine's system for free primary and secondary legal aid provision is amongst the most extensive in the world. The system was conceptualized in 2011 and has had a bit of a time to mature and build up its operations. And I'm pleased to note here that UNDP was amongst the first development partners that supported the establishment of the system. However, the annexation of Crimea back in 2014 and the simmering conflict in eastern Ukraine, which is well into its 7th year, have put the system to the test. This conflict, which is protracted and armed, is affecting the lives and livelihoods of more than 3.5 million people living on both sides of the conflict line, and has forced more than 1.5 million people to flee their homes and registered as IDPs. Ukraine is rated as the 9th largest country in the world in terms of the number of IDPs, who, as we all know so very well, once they have registered, they automatically become entitled to free legal assistance. The rule of law infrastructure in the conflict-affected oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk is experiencing difficulties as police, courts, and also legal aid providers in these two oblasts, in these two regions, are seriously understaffed and overwhelmed by the heavy workload. Moreover, the capacities of the police and courts to be client-oriented are still rather weak. So, responding to this situation, UNDP has embarked on a number of initiatives which are exploring and pilot testing innovative approaches and also generating homegrown solutions to address these challenges, to strengthen the capacity of the rule of law infrastructure, and also to trigger some systemic changes. With our partners, we have established a network of free legal aid centers, which are providing remote and online legal aid to the people living in the conflict-affected communities. We have already established a mobile app called Your Rights, which is available for public use and is providing legal assistance to IDPs and also to victims of sexual and domestic violence. This app goes beyond mere provision of information and offers step-by-step practical guidance to its users on the protection and restoration of their rights. UNDP is also strongly advocating and supporting rights-based approach to strengthening the rule of law infrastructure, for example, from the practice of monthly reporting by police to local communities, opening small community police offices in rural areas, to gender-sensitive policing and dialogue with youth. Returning to digitalization and the focus of our discussion, I would like to concentrate on two issues which I believe are of high importance. legal literacy, and digital skills. Since 2016, we are conducting annual security and justice survey, which consistently emphasizes two pillars that enable rights violations. Firstly, the slow, inefficient, and very expensive process of rights protection via the judiciary. And secondly, low levels of legal literacy and awareness of instruments available to citizens. This aspect of citizens' awareness and practical skills is becoming even more constraining factor at times of crisis and lockdown. The situation is further aggravated when traditional methods of obtaining services and guidance become unavailable, and the needs for use of IT technologies really comes to the fore. Last year, at the end of last year, UNDP, in partnership with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, conducted an assessment, nationwide assessment of the digital literacy of the people of Ukraine. And the outcome of this study is rather worrisome. 38% of Ukrainians have digital literacy, which is below the benchmark, and 15% have no digital skills whatsoever. Only 14% of Ukrainians know how to protect their data online. So even if a person knows that he or she is eligible to access to justice and to receive legal aid, if this person doesn't have IT skills, he or she will not avail himself or herself of this opportunity. Hence, the critical importance of us, in partnership with other agency and development partners, to continue investing in improving digital literacy and enhancing IT skills. I would like to conclude by, if you will, stating the obvious. Digitalization is a powerful driver of development. However, without proper attention to filling the digital divides linked to gender, age, skills, disabilities, and economic status, it could further exacerbate inequalities and disparities. So there is a need to look at both sides of the coin and make sure that while we are reaping the benefits of digitalization, at the same time, we are making sure that the rights of everyone are protected and promoted and no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dafina. Let's now move on to the last place, and I think the last place that we will go to, Fiji, and I think the place where the next day has started. Ravai, can I hand over to you?
Thank you so much, Sam. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and warm greetings from Fiji. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share this platform and to present some of the work that we are doing in Fiji. I am joined in this presentation by Julie Van Dassen, who is the Access to Justice Specialist at UNDP Fiji. And after a very brief intro that I'm going to give, then she will get into some of the details of the digitalization work that we have been doing. So for us, as a multi-country office covering 10 Pacific Island countries, the enormous amount of work that we have to do to support digitalization is really insurmountable. However, the example that we are going to share today, which focuses on Fiji, does show the possibilities and the open doors that are available to us to be able to make certain significant changes. And as such, of course, continuing to strengthen the rule of law and promoting human rights remains the cornerstone of the work that we do. The Fiji Access to Justice Project, which is funded by the EU and implemented by UNDP, of course, supports access to justice and with a particular focus on impoverished communities and vulnerable groups. And it does so by empowering, first of all, the legal rights holders themselves to be able to access services with a focus on people living with people with disabilities and survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And at the second level, it also is working with strengthening the capacities of civil society to strengthen their accompaniment services for vulnerable victims and those seeking to use the justice services. And finally, working with various institutions that are delivering justice. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented for us a particular challenge. And of course, within the context of small island developing states, this has taken a very peculiar angle for us because of some of the challenges that are presented by remoteness, communication, and the challenges of connectivity and being able to fully capitalize on digitalization as the rest of the world can do. But as is going to be shown by the examples that we are going to share shortly, I think the opportunities are there, but obviously we need to invest a lot more given some of the challenges that are presented through a SEEDS context. However, as much as I say that, I think the SEEDS dimension also does present opportunities for strategies around COVID response, particularly, of course, for the governance sector, as well as on access to justice and working with governments. Today, we had an opportunity to present before the government of Fiji some of the opportunities to capitalize on e-platforms, to strengthen e-governance, and some of the examples we are hearing in this meeting will definitely resonate and are opportunities for us to build on moving forward. Over to you, Julie, to move on to the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravai. As Ravai mentioned, we'll be looking at two different areas, and I'll try to keep it as succinct as possible, given that I know that we're running over time already. In response to the COVID pandemic in small island states, our primary focus was on getting things to be as remote as possible and investing in longer term opportunities and longer term infrastructure that could be used by our partners. So with our NGO partners, we have been supporting a number of NGOs with grants over the past few years, and two of the larger partners, Medical Services Pacific and Empower Pacific, have worked with the UNDP Fiji office since 2018 to provide justice support services with a specific focus on SGBV survivors and vulnerable victims. They provide medical, legal, counseling, and referral services to Fijians and conduct outreach on basic rights, domestic violence and SGBV, and improving the justice sector in remote areas. The onset of the COVID pandemic in Fiji brought with it quite swift and sometimes sudden restrictions in movement. The government shut down international travel and domestic inter-island travel quite quickly and imposed curfews nationwide, as well as lockdowns, which were enforced separately in 3 major cities in response to the COVID cases. And these happened quite suddenly. So in order to help the CSOs respond to this, UNDP worked with these grantees to reprogram their quite hefty community outreach budgets that involve face-to-face outreach and assess their immediate needs to respond to the unfolding situation. So for MSP, Medical Services Pacific, with the rise of domestic violence cases and the difficulties in managing the victims requiring their support, Medical Services Pacific really required extra staff, and that was something that we were able to shift quite easily through the grant mechanism that we had given them in order to allow them to focus on staffing up offices where they were seeing a rise in cases and demand. And with Empower Pacific, they focus more on counseling and are working in hospitals and in specific centers to provide counseling to patients. So we had provided them initially with a number of mobile phones and tablets, laptops, data packages to deposit these terminals in the hospital and then enable them to be passed around to the different patients and also doctors and frontline nurses to receive remote counseling services via phone. But the main focus of this presentation, this part of the presentation, will be these helplines. Medical Services Pacific started up a child helpline. I think we can go to the next slide, sorry. On behalf of the Ministry of Women, Child and Poverty Alleviation. And they have been operating that on their behalf in coordination with the SGBV coordination team in Fiji for the past few months. And Empower Pacific has established a counseling helpline. This was something that did not exist at all before the COVID pandemic, so it was, in their minds to be able to set it up, and the pandemic gave them the opportunity to reprogram funds into this purpose. So on the 23rd of March, which was 3 days after the lockdown in Lautoka, which is where Empower is based, they were able to start up this hotline. The additional IT equipment that was provided to both organizations and out of a physical office or a physical location. And with the
I think we have a problem with the line.
Yes, it looks like Julie is breaking, so I'm just trying to contact her.
Yes, okay.
If there's a problem with your line.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
It looks like it's somewhere over there. Bear with us, dear audience of almost 200 people from all over the world. This is where technology requires patience. We didn't have to wait in line at customs at the airport, but this is what we get back. Sometimes we need to wait for technology to catch up. Is she calling in again, Ravai? I'm not hearing you.
Hi.
You're back.
Am I back now?
Back. Okay, good. Yes,
okay.
You're back.
Julie, you're back. You're
Sorry,
back.
I don't know what happened.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. So what was key about this was that within the grant mechanism, we were able to take have some flexibility in how we reallocated the grant. And so both NGOs were able to rechannel that money into hiring people, the people that they needed with extreme speed. And we took over the costs that were needed for the IT equipment and particularly kind of print and broadcast outreach to increase the overall budget for them. And this has been a success, as you can see. As the commercials and advertisements came on TV and went through print media, there was a steady increase in the number of callers, particularly as the counseling service with Empower. They were able to also increase the number of locations that were calling into them, and whereas originally it was primarily limited to their city and Lautoka. As you can see, a lot of people that were calling in for basic needs. Food was a big issue and remains a big issue, and so they have been using this channel to be able to refer people through to other NGOs that are providing this service. I think on the next slide, we want to break it up a little bit with a video, one of the advertisement with Charlie for the Child Helpline.
Bula, I'm Charlie from the Child Helpline. Life can be pretty fun for us kids, but sometimes it's not fun, and things can happen to us that make us feel scared and alone. At the Child Helpline, there's someone waiting by the phone right now. Yep, right now, for you to talk to. So give us a call. We're here to help.
At the Child Helpline, we're here for you. No matter what you're going through, anytime, day or night, call 1325.
That's 1325.
So that is one of actually several different versions of the Child Helpline commercials that have gone out on behalf of the Ministry of Women, Child and Poverty Alleviation. And Charlie has struck a chord with a lot of children in Fiji. I'd like to move on to another area of reprogramming that we've done, which is remote representation for courts and corrections. We know that prisons around the globe have experienced unique challenges as a result of the COVID pandemic because of the high risk that infection can spread quickly through the densely populated prison population. So to protect prisoners and officers, the Fiji Corrections Service has prevented visitors from coming in, including legal counsel, family, and friends, both from the prisons and from the officers' barracks. But of course, cutting off contact with the outside world is not a sustainable solution. neither from a human rights perspective nor a practical perspective. So to address this issue in Fiji, the Fiji Correction Service contacted UNDP to seek to establish a system in which inmates could use video conferencing facilities to have face-to-face meetings with their lawyers and visitation time with their families. With funding from the EU, the Access to Justice Project from UNDP provided the Fiji Correction Service with a number of laptops, Wi-Fi devices, data packages to set them up with these video conferencing capacities. And right now, the facilities have been available for just over 2 months, but there has been a huge, they're overwhelmingly popular. And the schedule has been set up between legal consultation days and family visitation days. Currently on the legal consultation days, 90 inmates, an average of 90 inmates per facility use these facilities each day. And family visitations have seen equal volumes. I've actually heard back from people in the field about the popularity of Tuesday and Sunday family visitation days. The video arrangements have enabled families living in more remote areas and families living abroad to see their relatives for the first time in years. The picture that you see on this slide, in fact, is a picture of a mother whose son is studying at the University of Hawaii on a scholarship, and she hasn't seen his face for about 4 years. So this is the first time they were able to see each other again and reunite, and it was extremely emotional. And that was the same for a number of people within prisons. So building on this, we also have a new police project which complements the work that we started up with the courts and corrections. We had a pilot project for first-hour procedures and video recorded interviews, in which UNDP has helped the police equip a pilot station with video recording technology. And UNDP, through this larger project over the next 4 years, will be helping the police equip all stations with the infrastructure to conduct video recorded interviews and digital identification parades. This will be augmented by video equipment to support the sexual offences unit, which includes secure and body cameras to record interviews, as well as teleconferencing services in police stations to allow vulnerable victims and witnesses, particularly children and victims of rape, to provide testimony remotely from a safe space closer to where they live.
Julie, can I ask you to wrap up?
Yeah, last sentence. And we are already seeing other countries looking to invest in it, including Vanuatu. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the technical glitch, but you solved it marvelously. Well done. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the presentations. We've been in Sierra Leone, Dominican Republic, Ukraine, and Fiji. We've heard from the overarching architecture on the digital instruments that we could use. And I was going through the questions that have come in. We've been trying to answer as much as we can as they came on. I'm just looking at what's happening now. Okay, so here let me try. I've tried to group a little bit some of the questions that have come. A few of them are very practical, and I would imagine that could just be done very quickly through the chat function. For example, a question to Sam in Sierra Leone, what the budget for the Justice app is. And there's another question for Sierra Leone on whether the Justice app could be used to mine data. In other words, can you use the app in such a way that it actually gives you data, which allows you to get a better idea of where you need to focus your justice services. So Sam, maybe I could ask you for a quick response to that question, and then there are a few broader questions which are more general for the whole panel. If you could just give a quick 1 or 2 minute response on that question. Can your app be used, can Justice app be used to mine data? Sam, are you hearing me?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was mute. Yes, thank you. The budget for the app currently, so far what we have spent is under $1 million over the 3-year period. So it's quite a cost-effective program endeavor. In terms of currently what we have in the field of the app is largely the record of the cases, the tracking of cases in courts and how those cases have been tried. We really don't have, it's not like an expanded app yet to track the data and to be able to mine the data. What data we currently can track is how many cases are being tried, how many cases are in the backlog, how many records are now installed and can be accessed, who is accessing those records, and how frequently are they accessing the records. So we can have those, we are recording and can document those data. But there's an opportunity to expand the app. So new ideas from colleagues will be appreciated, and we can, as we move into the next phase of the app, could build on that. But so far, those are the key data areas that can be that the app can record and we can track. Over.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam. That definitely answers the question. So what I kind of took from the other questions, and if the panelists disagree with me, I will hear it. But was 3 broad questions, and I wonder if I could put them to you one by one. There seem to be 3 kinds of issues around digitalization and innovation. One is a whole raft of issues that I think, Robert, you started off by pointing out is how do you use digitalization and innovation, but at the same time ensure fair trial, being heard, transparency, and all the other rule of law requirements and privacy. So maybe I could invite all of you to briefly reflect on that point, what experiences you have in that area of using digitalization and innovation, and at the same time maintaining the rule of law. The second cluster of questions I could ask you to think about has to do with the fact that you could start an app, you could start an innovation, you could start a digitalization process, but how do you ensure financial sustainability? How do you keep it going once UNDP leaves or another donor leaves? What are the sustainable funding models and that you know of, or mistakes that you've made that you think others could learn from? And the third, and you don't need to reflect on all of these, but there may be particular areas you want to say something about. But the third grouping that I digest from what I've seen has to do with the digital divide. How do you make sure that you can use digitalization, you can use information technology in places where maybe not everybody could read and write, maybe there's not limited access to the internet. So 3 questions, one to do with rule of law, fair trial, being heard, transparency. The second with the financial sustainability of whatever you're doing. And the third having to do with the digital divide. And maybe everybody could take about 3 to 5 minutes to respond to any of those. And then I hope we will do credit to the questions asked from the floor. Robert, can I start with you?
Sure, thank you very much, Sam. In fact, those questions are, I think, exactly what is emerging as themes, and very interesting ones. I put some responses in the Q&A function as well, but no question on the first issue around how to ensure fair trial while using technologies. The one issue that comes up a lot in this space is around the use of artificial intelligence systems, and putting all the case law into AI and then expecting it to spit out the kind of fair and unbiased judgment. Well, that's kind of okay, but it's not. AI systems only know what you put in it. So if there's inherent bias in what you put in the system, there will be inherent bias in the judgment. And so we need to be sure that we have true auditability of artificial intelligence systems. This is being discussed a lot in places like Silicon Valley and Shenzhen and other places where we need to trace back exactly how a machine made a decision. If we can't trace that back, we're using that technology irresponsibly. So that's critical. On the sustainability issue as well, you know, when in any innovation, my recommendation from the beginning is after you are sort of or during the pilot phase, you need to already identify a viable business model going forward, whether that is government taking it on board, whether it's running in a social enterprise, or whether an NGO or something that's going to be sustainable has to be there. Otherwise, there's really no point in scaling that because as one of the people pointed out in the Q&A, you know, as soon as UNDP funding stops, the thing will die. And that's just not going to serve anybody well. The digital divide is probably, for me, the toughest question because 45% of the world's population are not connected to internet. The number is much higher in terms of connectedness to mobile connections. So there are some services that can be received around SMS, but there's no question that some of the most vulnerable and marginalized populations are living in areas outside of connected zones or unable to afford the access. And so Dafina mentioned this in a bit in her intervention as well. It's not that we should do one versus the other. And universal connectivity is in the SDGs. We need to find every possible way to extend connectivity to people. And there's a whole set of discussions going on with UNICEF and ITU and others around large-scale connectivity initiatives for communities. And UNDP should be involved in those and should be understanding what the issues are. And in some countries like Philippines and others, there have been there has been work supported an extension of connectivity. In other cases like Bangladesh, where there's remotely available digital services that are being offered in digital centers that are out in remote areas so people can actually go there and access digital government services. I'm speaking generally, not specifically to rule of law. But finding creative ways to make sure that government and other partners, we as UNDP, we can't let people forget we are there to leave no one behind. So we need to understand how to, yes, use the benefits of technology, but also keep our eye on including populations that are otherwise marginalized. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. Sam, can I give you the floor?
Yes, thanks, Sam. So on the sustainability question, we are confident that the Justice App or the case management system we are introducing will be sustained for 3 reasons. One, as I said, from the level of the president, there is a determination to make Sierra Leone a digitalized country. So there is a national strategy for digitization of government systems, including the justice system. So that policy, on the policy, from the policy standpoint, there is a national commitment to this agenda. Secondly, there is an operational institutional infrastructure set up within government. The Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation is tracking how various government systems are shifting away from paper-based to digital systems, including education, including health, including the justice system. So that commitment is also reflected in the national budget to move the governance system from paper-based to a digital system. So that gives us confidence that the app, Justice App, is taking root. Third, we've got commitment from the Chief Justice that the Justice App now will be integrated in the training curriculum of the judiciary. And once it's part of the curriculum of the training of judges, that makes it easier for the usability to become second nature for judges. And fourth, the 80 judges that are now using the app are increasingly finding it even far more useful, far more efficient than the paper-based system. So the value added to their work and to enhancing their work is inspiring confidence in the app and making it a second nature. And that gives us the confidence that more and more, even including in 2020, the use, the operationalization of the app is increasingly assumed by the judiciary and by the Ministry of Justice.
Thank you, Sam. Great response and some really good advice there on how to make sure something like this is sustainable. One of them also being, I find that an interesting one, that it's embedded in a national innovation strategy. So it's part of something bigger and not just a lonely project within the justice sector. Inka, can I turn to you?
Thank you. Once again, extremely interesting panels, and thank you, colleagues, also for your fantastic outputs. Basically, a couple of reflections about the three questions you put on the floor, Sam. Basically, about the transparency issue, I think it's important that we separate the whole issue of going digital. That basically is a mean from the underlying and normally pre-existing weaknesses we face in the justice system. This is quite evident, for example, in Latin America and the Caribbean cases. The transparency has been an issue, and it has not to do with the mean we are using for the trials. So basically, over there, what we need to assure that basically we don't use digital solutions and as one blueprint, but we need to integrate it in more integrated conceptualization to how to tackle the underlying root causes of the weaknesses we face in each and every context. So, for example, in that case, in the case of the question, we need to assure that basically the judges have all the needed evidence, they have access to it, they basically are part of the whole justice chain process. So basically, I think the one key message over here is we need to separate the means from the ends and have clear integrated strategies on the pre-existing and root causes and fragilities we are facing in the justice systems. About the financial sustainability, completely agree what Robert pointed out, but also I wanted to point out something, Sam, you mentioned in your introduction, that in many cases we need to see what are the costs and what is there actually an investment. Many times investing in innovative solutions actually allows us to do more with less. So this is actually the case what we are projecting in the case of Dominican Republic, that basically the whole boost to going digital will turn out to be medium and long-term savings, and actually quite big savings. On the digital sides, I just wanted to make a bit of reflections we have had also in the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the whole issue of investing in connectivity and going digital. And I think over here, for example, some of the recent estimations, the Global Human Development Report Office made about the true cost of starting to close the digital gap are actually not so big. So basically, I think there's also a room for global collaboration and discussions on access, digital access to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's now go to Ukraine. Shall I give you the floor first, Alexander, and then go to Dafina, or the other way around?
Okay, thank you.
Why don't you start? Yes, go ahead.
Maybe I will try to answer two questions. First one concerning financial sustainability. In general, first, maybe we have to understand that the COVID is not the reason why everybody start the process of digitalization in Ukraine for legal aid, for example. This is just the acceleration of the processes that already exist previously. In general, all projects that we are trying to implement, we are trying to make it self-sustainable as it can be. Usually asking donor to finance the beginning of the project is just the beginning. It's first investment that can help us to show for government that the problem that we are trying to solve, it's a very important problem, and further solving of this problem, it's a thing that will help to resolve a lot of problems, not just in law sphere, and can resolve even in social problems. Concerning, so in case we're explaining that, we can budget further the supporting of our initiatives, and further that initiatives could be supported by the government budget. And concerning digital divide, once again, we're not going to exchange the system absolutely and go only on digital services. As I mentioned, a lot of clients that are coming to our system, it's not the clients who just want to receive some services in respect of legal aid. Very often they're just coming to explain us the problem and to make some kind of discussion with our specialist. But in case people need to receive very fast and very simple services like legal aid, legal advice, or receiving legal aid, secondary legal aid, we're giving for them the possibility to do that through the digital services, so they can do that, not even go out from home. So this kind, it's for us, it's not digital divide, it's implementing new services and making access to justice more simple for people who can do that.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Yes, people-centered, user-friendly justice. Dafina, over to you.
Well, I would like to thank all the colleagues who just responded and shared their reflections on the three questions. I am afraid most of the points which I wanted to make have already been made, so I'll be very, very quick. On the financial sustainability, ultimately, digital transformation should be led and owned by the government. So when we start new initiative, we start small, we pilot test, we experiment, but from the get-go, we're looking for like-minded partners, and we're looking for public institutions at local, regional, or national level, which are interested and which are committed to take over once the experiment has been completed. So financial sustainability ultimately cannot be ensured by providing ODA, and expanding connectivity requires big time investment, both domestic, public and private, and also foreign direct investments. And this is not the role of UNDP. We could serve as a platform, we could serve as an accelerator, if you will, but we need to lay the groundwork for investors to come after we have completed, hopefully, a successful experiment and continue this process. If we don't have from the very start, from the onset of new initiative, government ownership and strong commitment, if this process is not embedded in national strategy, we will never be able to ensure sustainability. On the digital divide, in middle-income countries like Ukraine, development is not about learning how to walk. Development is about managing complexities and making difficult choices and trade-offs. Hence the role of UNDP, while trying to mitigate digital divide and provide policy options and programmatic responses, we are looking at different ways of mitigating this. And at the same time, we're trying to enhance legal literacy, because people need to know what are their rights and how they can claim their rights. And at the same time, strengthen IT skills, because even if people know their rights, if they don't know how to access legal aid and justice online, they will be left behind, and the divide will be widening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dafina. Now to Fiji, Ravai and Julie.
Great. I will speak briefly on the issue of sustainability and say specifically for Fiji, the Fijian government has always had an ambition to make services available online, and they have this huge initiative, which is part of the National Development Strategy, which they call Digital Fiji. So in many ways, because it is part of what the government intends to do, it becomes a good launching pad and somewhere to hook some of the ideas on digital transformation for access to justice. Specifically today, we had, as the UN, made a presentation to the government of Fiji on the socio-economic impact assessment that we've been doing. And one of the key recommendations, which was really part of almost like a pre-budget consultation exercise, was to push and again praise government for coming up with Digital Fiji, but at the same time, making a case to continue to invest on e-services, e-platform, or e-governance, more or less in the same manner as the MyGov that was shared earlier by Robert in Georgia. So in that sense, I think really we kind of see some of the templates that are available that we can use to work on in order to facilitate or support sustainability, so that once we move out, these actions are naturally integrated into the government system.
Thank you very much. Julie. Let's see, Julie, are you, oh, you're mute.
Hi, so sorry, just to add to what Ravai has said, I seem to be very technologically unastute today. Under this Digital Fiji umbrella, we have already been investing within the justice sector, specifically the Judicial Department and the Legal Aid Commission, to develop case management systems, e-filing systems, and other digitized technologies for them. So this was a natural offshoot of that. And I think that we have built it together with our partners, and it will be taken on within their budgets going forward. I saw one mention of confidentiality and policies around this, and as I described, because of the COVID, because of the immediacy of the need of doing more remote trials in particular, the courts are still working on solidifying the policies around this remote representation, but they had opened it specifically for registration, filing, and on a case-by-case basis, which became much more frequent over the COVID lockdown period, allowing people to provide testimony and be represented remotely from the prisons, where they were under supervision during the trial periods by prison officials, but for legal counsel, had the opportunity or the option to either use the Skype on the computer or on the phone in order to keep a level of privacy for themselves. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, then I suppose it's up to me now to present some closing remarks, and maybe I will depress you, and that's not my intention, but I will go back to what I said, what I started off with. Last year, the best estimate of the global access to justice gap was 5.1 billion people. At any one given time, there are 1.5 billion people who, in the simple civic cases, simple crime cases, are not being helped. We know also from the data that only between 5, maximum 10%, and that is very rare, only 5% of the cases of the legal problems that people have end up in courts or end up in the formal justice system. 95%, 90% end up somewhere else. We also know from many surveys that to have to wait 3 years for a decision in the formal justice system is quite normal in most countries. That is all before COVID hit us. So that data was already bad. And now in COVID, we can be sure that it's a lot worse. And we have SDG 16, we have a target, SDG 16.3, equal access to justice. So what we should all be thinking when we think about innovation and we think about how information technology can help, in my view, is only one thing, and that is scale, 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 scale. How can we massively scale? Because what we've been doing over the last 30 years has not been enough. That's clear. And scaling, I think, means two things. If you read the task force report, is first on prevention. How can you prevent justice problems? And secondly, how can you solve justice problems, knowing that only about 5% end up in the official system? So there's huge innovation space. And you might, if you want, you might want to call that a fantastic market in which you could do things, of course, but that's a bit of a nasty way to look at it. And the only way that we could do that, and I think that's where digitalization comes in, digitalization is not a goal. The goal is equal access to justice for all, but digitalization can be a fantastic tool to get there. It can allow things to happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. But we need to figure out how to do that. And in order to do that, a couple of things keep emerging. Is one, the need to put outcomes for people at the center of everything we do, every single project, every single design, every single financing mechanism we have, outcomes for people. And we've got to get better at measuring those outcomes. Secondly, the importance of new partnerships. Thinking differently. We've heard about the importance of the public sector. There's also the importance of the private sector. There's the importance of in-between sectors. But this will only be resolved through what I sometimes call unusual partnerships. Unusual partnerships that unlock innovation potential, because it's not all going to be solved by the justice sector. And research shows that the world is rife with failed case management systems that were imposed top down, that went over budget, that had design flaws, that did not have sustainable funding, and that in the end were not used. So we cannot do this in any other way but through innovation partnerships and different types of partnerships, and finding new financing. That's the last thing, finding new financing models. And I think those three areas, putting outcomes at the center and helping us all do that, constructing new partnerships and finding new financing, are all three areas in which UNDP, as I know it, is fantastically good and can be a wonderful facilitator and enabler. So I hope that in a way, that this seminar has been useful, and that UNDP could play that role, because it's badly needed. With that, I end the session exactly on the minute that we were supposed to set it. That is nothing to do with me, but just pure coincidence. I want to thank all the almost 200 people that were here. I want to thank the fantastic panel, and I want to thank the invisible people behind the scenes who made this all happen, the technical people and all the assistant moderators I had that were helping with WhatsApp to keep things on track, and wish you all a good continuation.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's Katie here.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks to all our colleagues in the country offices. Thank you, Ravi. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Katie. Lovely to meet you too. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, please stay online. We're going to close up now, and we're just waiting for the transition. May I check with Hamis? Do we have George with us?
George is here, but needs to be enabled to come on the video. There we go.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for staying on the line. Hopefully everyone who is here who would like to be part of the final session. This is the final session of the UNDP 2020 annual meeting, Strengthening the Rule of Law and Human Rights for Sustaining Peace and Fostering Development. This is session 6, the closing plenary. I'm going to go ahead and hand it straight off to Ms. Katie Thompson, the head of the Rule of Law, Security, and Human Rights team at the Crisis Bureau, UNDP.
Thank you so much, Hermes. That's really fabulous. Thank you to the colleagues who've just gone before. It's been actually really inspiring listening to all of those efforts and the opportunities and challenges that you've presented to us. So that was a great end to this 2 days. So I must confess to being very relieved. We have got through these sessions with no huge blips and with an amazing connectivity from across the planet. And I'm just so happy that we have managed to put together all of our partners and a lot of individuals who would not normally be able to attend these virtual sessions to be with us and to exchange on these important issues around rule of law, security, and human rights. And I really hope that many of you will stay with us and accompany the consultations and engage and share your thoughts and observations from this event, but also in general on the state of how the rule of law interacts with issues of the social contract in this particularly complex crisis that we face in a context of extreme inequality, in a context of racism, and enable us to change our program and our priorities to adapt to those needs. One of the things I wanted to emphasize for all of you was that we had to make some tough decisions planning these sessions, and we had to decide what we would take out of the portfolio. And to emphasize that we have a portfolio that cuts across the broad dimensions of rule of law, security, and human rights. And we work on everything from human support to human rights systems and human rights defenders to working with justice, with constitutional support and issues around states of emergency, legal rights, to the security side, where we work a lot on small arms, on violence reduction, and also on disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. This is a very broad portfolio of work. And I just want to highlight some other aspects that we haven't managed to discuss, including the work that we do with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on national human rights action plans, the work that we do with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Global Alliance for National Human Rights Institutions to support national human rights institutions in their work in providing oversight and scrutiny and promoting human rights at national level. We had a big meeting with that group last week where we had a really intense conversation around reprisals and human rights defenders that we will take very seriously in shaping our future priorities. We have a strong presence in the Human Rights Council. We engage strongly in making statements there from a UNDP perspective at the appropriate time. And as you've heard today, we're focusing through our overall approach, human rights-based approach to development. We are now focusing on these critical partners in the private sector to look at how we can work on business and human rights. We also hope to be going more deeply into looking at issues around green justice, environmental justice, and human rights. I noticed some questions on this issue earlier on the business and human rights session, and just now. The intersection between of responsibilities with regard to upholding the rights to both people and human rights, and the connection with sustainability and the protection of the planet are intimate, and we need to be able to explore in concrete terms, in programming terms, but also in policy terms, that connection a little bit more deeply. So we really welcome to hear from our colleagues, especially in UNDP, but also in UNEP and other agencies, how we can do more work in this area in a way that complements the rest of the portfolio. And thank you to those colleagues who flagged those issues during the discussion. Another area where we really want to see an expanded thinking is on exploring the connections between people-centered security and development. So we have a set of colleagues who are working on this area, also with the Swedish institute, the Folke Bernadotte Academy, and we'll be looking more deeply at how we can explore how we improve working on the security provision, on governance and oversight and accountability issues, as well as effectiveness and service provision, in particular for women, and in particular in terms of criminal justice and its interface with ordinary communities. This area is something that we've been working on for a long time across the globe. In particular, we do that work in conflict contexts and protracted crises. But we want to look at this from a deep development perspective, and we really appreciate your engagement. I also want to flag our work on disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, which now it means that we have to look very closely at how we can learn lessons from that portfolio, to look at how we engage in the prosecution of those who have been engaged in terrorist activities, and also in terms of how they are also reintegrated, a complex issue of our time, particularly pertinent for some of the most hard-hit settings that we work in. And finally, later this year, just to flag that we're going to be launching work on small arms control and armed violence reduction in line with goal 16.1 with our colleagues from the Office for Disarmament Affairs. Where we haven't been doing quite well enough is on gender justice. I'm really happy that we had Beatrice join us yesterday. We've always had a strong commitment in this area, but it's never strong enough. So we hope, with the benefit of the investments from our donors, that we'll be able to increase this focus in UNDP and our partnership with UN Women in the coming years. It would be remiss to mention access to justice, because Sam has so well highlighted the work of the Justice Task Force, which we fully subscribe to and contribute to, and this will remain a mainstay of what we do. And the innovation and digitization agenda for us is important. It's a means to the end of establishing the rule of law and respect for human rights. So we're very committed to exposing how we can do that work more sustainably and more accessibly, and in a way that it respects human rights. So partnership is a key for us, and we are so glad to have had so many people populate this meeting, so many deep contributions. And I really look forward to taking all of those efforts and using them to build the next step, the next global program that we will implement in UNDP, and building an even bigger tent which responds to the trends and the rather difficult experiences that we are all currently going through. So we do commit to continue to work with you. We want to continue to have this conversation. We would really appreciate your engagement on Spark Blue, that of you and your institutions. And we will continue to iterate our support as we move further. I want to say that I represent a large, very active and very, very enthusiastic and skillful team. And I'm really thankful for them to help to make these meetings happen. We took on rather a big challenge, and I really think that we've done well. And lots of lessons learned for doing this in future. But thanks to the whole team, because it's really you that's helped to make this happen. I'm going to now pass over to George, because I believe he's going to continue, and then he will continue all of the thanks that we want to deliver to all of you. Thanks very much.
Katie, thank you, and good day, colleagues. Really tremendous thanks to everybody participating for all of your contributions over the past 2 days. It really has been a wonderful pleasure to have you as part of this annual meeting, and to hear from the very wide range of national counterparts, partners from the UN, from donors, and from UNDP, on all of the innovative ways that we're trying to tackle the incredibly wide range of challenges that we've discussed over the past 2 days. We have heard over the past 2 days that we must continue to work towards peaceful, just, and inclusive societies in order to tackle the far-reaching consequences, not only of COVID-19, but how it intersects with increasing conflict and exclusion, continued perceptions of injustice, and shrinking civic space. Rule of law, security, and human rights institutions are key to sustaining cohesive societies, as well as protecting and respecting international human rights standards, the right to access to justice and due process. We've also heard how our work in these areas must be people-centered, whether it's increasing access to justice for displaced populations, how best to support prisons in the pandemic context, dealing with impunity for conflict-related sexual violence, or supporting victim-centric transitional justice processes to build and sustain peace. We must always be mindful of empowering people to overcome the obstacles they encounter in seeking peace, justice, and inclusion. The current crisis has also provided an opportunity to rectify and get back onto a more sustainable trajectory guided by the 2030 Agenda. Efforts towards global response and recovery should be fair, sustainable, and above all, inclusive. And UNDP's COVID-19 response will continue to support communities in an integrated manner, including through furthering a human rights-based social contract. Bettering the way we work is part of that support. I hope that many of you have already participated in the online consultations on our Spark Blue platform, as Katie has mentioned. The virtual rooms will continue to be active until the 24th of July. So we really do encourage you to provide your inputs, views, and opinions on the annual meeting, its discussions on the next phase of the UNDP Global Program, and on the wide range of issues at stake in these last couple of days of discussion. It's important for us. It will help to guide where we go in the future. So please do contribute and engage. I'd like to offer a sincere note of appreciation and thanks to our partners that continue to support our work, the Netherlands, the United States, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, Germany, Norway, and Japan. I'd also like to thank the UNDP Rule of Law team, who went so far to make this event a success. Katie, Alex, Hermes, Kaya, Dori, the Global Rule of Law team, Sangeeta from the communications team, as well as all of the UNDP country office participating and UN resident coordinators participating, and our partners from the UN, UNODC, UNHCR, UN Women, and UNODC, as well as all others engaged in organizing this event and ensuring its success. Well done. It's the first time we've done this event in this format, and it's gone quite smoothly and quite well, and thank you to all for that. Thank you all for being here with us these past 2 days. We look forward to continuing this discussion, and more importantly, we look forward to continuing the important work that we've been doing together these past years and for the future. Thank you. Well done. Everybody have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, George. We're going to. I was asking Hermes if we could see everybody, but apparently that's hard. I don't hear you.
I was muted by the moderators.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's 125 people out there. I just can't see any of them.
I know. If you click the speaker view at the top, if you click the little piece at the top, you can see a lot of people there, the little gallery.
Now I can see you, and Rustam and Aimura.
Thank you, Rustam. It was good to see you on the beach.
Yeah, as usual. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you again to the team as a whole. Again, as I said, this is the first time we've done it in this format, and it went, from my perspective, incredibly smoothly. So to Hermes, to Alex, to Katie, to everybody else involved, well done. Thank you. And it sets a new precedent for how well we can do these types of events for the future.
Yes, I'm not sure Hermes will come back. We'll see.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the webinar now. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so I think we're streaming, right? We've finished at everything. Thank you so much, Hermes, for that great transition.
Thank you.
Bye, colleagues. Speak to you all later.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Bye.